Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Valerie Reyes. Valerie Reyes is a 24-year-old girl. She grew up in a loving family in the suburbs of New York. Valerie has 3 younger brothers. Valerie is cheerful, sociable, and friendly. Valerie is very close to her mother. The two share their private secrets and often discuss everything like two best friends. Valerie has many different talents, including drawing and singing. However, her true passion is to become a professional tattoo artist. With the guidance of her brother, who has experience in this field, Valerie learned and developed her skills. She dreams of opening a tattoo shop with her brother, where they can turn their creative ideas into reality. During this time, Valerie works part-time at a small, cozy bookstore. Valerie's life took a major turn in January 2018. That's when she met Javier da Silva, a 26-year-old Venezuelan man who had just moved to New York on a popular dating site. Javier told a touching story about how he had to flee his country in crisis to save his life. Because of this, he was unable to complete his university studies. Currently, Javier is working hard in a restaurant to build a new life in a foreign country. Valerie felt sympathy for him and they started a romantic relationship after a few dates. However, the relationship developed too quickly and only lasted about 3 months. Javier mentioned marriage, which scared Valerie because she was not ready. After feeling that everything was moving too fast, Valerie decided to end the relationship. Javier initially made a good impression on Valerie's family because he seemed to care about her and wanted the best for her. However, when Valerie expressed her desire to break up, Javier's behavior changed. He refused to accept the end of the relationship. He sent dozens of messages a day, begging Valerie to continue the relationship. In September 2018, Javier called Valerie. He said he had used her bank card to pay for an online purchase and wanted to meet Valerie to return the money. Valerie immediately sensed something was wrong and suspected that it was just an excuse to meet. Valerie then confided in a friend and asked the friend to talk to Javier so that he would stop bothering her. After the conversation, Javier stopped calling and texting. Valerie felt relieved and could finally return to her normal life with small joys and exciting plans for the future. However, Valerie did not know that the worst was yet to come. On January 24, 2019, Javier, whom Valerie had broken up with long ago and had not kept in touch with, wrote to an acquaintance of Valerie. In the letter, Javier claimed that he had caught Valerie in bed with another man. This information surprised and angered Valerie because she knew it was not true. January 27th, after her shift at the bookstore, Valerie returned home and called her mother Ana Reyes in a state of panic. She cried and screamed into the phone that someone wanted to kill her. Valerie had been worried for days and felt that someone was following her. Valerie was so distressed that she could only cry into. After a while of talking to her mother, Valerie seemed to feel a little better. Before going to bed, Valerie texted her mother that she had calmed down and was ready to go to bed. Valerie's family became worried when she did not show up for dinner on January 29th. They kept calling her, but did not receive any answer. This made the family feel scared and uneasy. After waiting for a long time, the family decided to seek help from the police. On January 30th, they went to the police and filed a missing persons report for Valerie. The police immediately began investigating the case and began searching Valerie's apartment, but found no significant clues. There were no signs of a struggle or kidnapping. There were only small blood stains on the pillowcase in the bathroom, but the police thought it could be a simple injury. The police decided to look for Valerie and contacted her mobile operator. They discovered that Valerie's phone had been switched to airplane mode on the night of January 28th at around 3 a.m. Since then, the phone had not been turned on. This made the police and Valerie's family even more worried. But the most alarming fact was that someone had accessed Valerie Cloud's storage and carefully studied all her photos, videos, and messages. Another worrying detail was that at 5 a.m. on January 29th, just 2 hours after the phone was turned off, someone had withdrawn $1,000 from Valerie's bank account. Surveillance cameras captured a man driving a black Honda to the ATM, quickly taking the money and disappearing. When the license plate was checked, police quickly determined that the car belonged to Javier, Valerie's ex-boyfriend. He was immediately placed on the list of prime suspects. During a search of Javier's home, no evidence was found relating to Valerie's disappearance. However, surveillance camera footage showed that on the evening of January 28, Javier left the house in a black Honda and went to Valerie's residence. Police checked Valerie's phone and found that there had been no calls or messages from Javier in recent months. This indicated that Valerie had not invited Javier to visit or meet. After Valerie went missing, Javier turned off his phone, so his movements could not be tracked. However, at 6 a.m., his cell phone briefly became active near Harrison, Connecticut. At 7:30 a.m., the phone was found in Greenwich. Javier returned home to Queens at 9:43 a.m., as confirmed by nearby cameras. Police later found that Javier had posted an old photo of them on Instagram the night before Valerie went missing. His posting of this photo could have been to let people know that they were still together, or it could have been some kind of secret sign. While the police were investigating Valerie's disappearance, Valerie's family and friends continued to search for her. They posted flyers with Valerie's picture and checked all of Valerie's usual haunts. A week passed in anxiety, with sleepless nights and exhausting searches. But still no results. On February 5th, highway workers saw a red suitcase on the side of the road. When they opened the suitcase, they saw a horrifying scene. Inside the suitcase was the body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were tied tightly with rope, her mouth was sealed with a thick layer of tape. Her thin shirt was torn, her jeans were torn and dirty. The girl was not wearing shoes. People noticed a terrible wound on her head. They immediately called the police to report the incident. The police arrived at the scene. Through tests, they quickly identified the victim as Valerie Reyes. Valerie's parents received news about their daughter. During the autopsy, the gruesome details of the murder were revealed. Before her death, Valerie had been severely beaten in the head with a blunt object, and then, while still alive, she had been stuffed into a suitcase and left to die. The evidence that Javier Dilva was involved in the murder was that Valerie's bank card was found in his wallet. During questioning, Javier gave a surprising explanation. Javier claimed that he had found Valerie's bank card and ID card at the bar. The police presented all the evidence they had gathered, including surveillance camera footage, details of his car, and the movements of his phone on the night of the incident. The police told Javier that they knew he was at Valerie's house on the night of the incident. Javier later changed his story. Javier admitted that he had been drinking too much that night and might have been at Valerie's house, but he didn't know everything. When the police showed him a photo of Valerie's body in a suitcase, Javier was shocked and cried. JV tried to justify his actions. According to his account, Javier went to Valerie's house that night after she invited him. They had sex, but during sex, Valerie collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness. Javier claimed that he wanted to help Valerie and performed CPR and cardiac massage on her, but all were unsuccessful. To avoid being charged with murder, he tried to hide the evidence of the crime. However, when the police asked why Valerie's body was found bound and gagged, Javier was unable to answer. When police later asked about Valerie's bank card, Javier stated that he had withdrawn another $4,350 from Valerie's account. During a search of Javier's home, Valerie's phone and laptop, which he had taken, were also found. Javier finally collapsed after a thorough examination of Valerie's body. There were signs of struggle and violence on her body. Under Valerie's fingernails, Javier's skin and blood were found. Javier's DNA was everywhere on the suitcase, in the car interior, on Valerie's belongings. Javier was immediately arrested and formally charged with the murder of Valerie Reyes. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Javier da Silva finally fully admitted his guilt in court. On February 5, 2020, a hearing was held in the case of 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. Javier's lawyer tried to defend his actions, arguing that it was the result of a violent and jealous outburst, depression after the breakup with Valerie, and drug use. On September 3, 2021, the court affirmed that 28-year-old Javier da Silva was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This means that he will spend most of his life behind bars. The investigation also found that Javier had been living in the United States illegally. He arrived in the country on May 8, 2017, and his 90-day stay expired on August 5, 2017. Therefore, after serving his 30-year prison sentence, he will be immediately deported to his native Venezuela. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Cronin. Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan lived in Essex, England. Jennifer was deeply devoted to her family and children. She was a kind, warm, and caring person who had a very attached relationship with Susan. They loved and admired each other greatly. This makes her cherish and appreciate their relationship. She grew up with a big dream, to one day having a family of her own, and children who would love and admire her just as she admired her own parents. In 1990, Susan was dating Kieran Lynch, a young bricklayer 3 years her senior. At the time, Susan was working as an apprentice hairdresser, known for her distinct style. Susan's friends were impressed by how Kieran treated her, often remarking that he seemed to adore her. Their relationship blossomed, and the couple got married in 1994. It was important to Susan that Kieran got along with her parents, which he did. In fact, Kieran quickly formed a close bond with wife's mother, Jennifer. Kieran and Susan had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were very close to their grandparents and visited them at least twice a week. As soon as they heard grandmother's, Jennifer, gentle voice, the girls would excitedly run to her. When they were young, they looked up to their father as a perfect role model, the most kind-hearted and generous man they knew. Despite his busy work schedule, Kieran made time for his daughters, using all his free time to be with them. However, there was another side to his personality. He was highly competitive and always strived to be the best in everything he did and had a desire to be in control, creating a perfect image of their family. Kieran struggled to cope with the stress of supporting his wife and 2 daughters. As a result, he often lashed out in anger, damaging things and creating chaos. Over time, his behavior worsened, especially when he had been drinking. His temper tantrums became more aggressive and intense, causing his daughters to view him in a different light. They vividly remembered the incidents when their intoxicated father would shout, criticize, and eventually turn violent, smashing plates, slamming doors, and overturning furniture. In times of turmoil, the girls would find a safe haven, hiding from their angry father until he fell asleep. They moved quietly around the house, making sure not to wake him. After these tantrums, Kieran would often feel guilty and try to make amends. He would fix the things he had broken the day before and attempt to explain why he had acted that way. He would sincerely apologize to his wife and daughters, promising that it wouldn't happen again. However, he never changed, and then the same thing happened again and again. Like many people experiencing domestic violence, Susan felt deeply ashamed and humiliated, which led her to conceal the turmoil at home from everyone. Despite trying to appear strong in front of her daughters, Susan would often break down in tears at night, confused and hurt by the transformation of her loving partner into an overbearing and controlling presence. Whenever Kieran came home in a bad mood, Susan and her daughters would make to close the windows so the neighbors wouldn't hear the loud arguments. Even the smallest thing could make Kieran's become angry. If Susan was late coming home from work, Kieran would search the town for her. When the daughters grew up, they started to stand up to their father when he was being cruel to their mother, Susan. At first, this seemed to make Kieran behave better. However, one serious incident happened when Kieran, angry, almost hit his daughter, who stepped in to protect her mother, Susan. Although the family tried to hide their problems from those around them, the truth was eventually exposed. In 2015, people close to Kieran noticed a significant change in his behavior and appearance. A friend who hadn't seen him in months was shocked, and they met unexpectedly in the city. Kieran had lost significant weight and looked gaunt. His demeanor seemed distant and contemplative. It wasn't long before the cause of these changes became clear. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder in a small tube in Kieran's work clothes that she was washing. This discovery explained Kieran's recent erratic behavior, and it filled Susan with fear. Susan confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and saying he valued them more than family. Kieran didn't make any excuses, but instead asked Susan not to discuss the matter with their daughters. When a large amounts of money started to disappear from their credit card, Susan tried to talk to Kieran about it, but he became defensive and aggressive. As a result, the home environment became increasingly tense and strained. Kieran's behavior becomes more and more scary. One time, while their daughters were away, he put a knife to Susan's throat and threatened to end both their lives. On another occasion, he set up a noose in the attic. As these frightening incidents grew more frequent, Susan realized that if she didn't act, the situation could have disastrous consequences. Despite her desire to protect her family, Susan found it hard to open up to her own mother, Jennifer, because she doesn't want her mother to be sad. However, Susan knew she had to take decisive action to change their situation. In November 2016, after 24 years of marriage, Susan and Kieran decided to separate. Kieran made the difficult decision to leave the family home and move back in with his parents. Susan understood that this was for the best, because their daughters are grown up and they should no longer endure their father's noisy arguments. Her top priority was the well-being of their children. The separation occurred with minimal conflict, and Susan was relieved, although she also felt guilty for not taking action sooner. However, it did Susan know that Kieran had no intention of giving up. After Kieran left, as the tension in the house finally dissipated, life started to get better, and for the first time in a long while, Susan felt happy again. She and her daughters were able to have normal conversations, watch movies together, laugh, and enjoy life without any stress. The worry about how Kieran would behave when he came home from work was gone. Susan realized that she was still attractive for men, and her confidence grew over time. People noticed that Kieran seemed to be moving on with his life, and Susan was glad that he had made some positive changes. Even though they were no longer together, Susan appreciated that Kieran was still a part of his children's lives. Susan had a tough time in her past relationships, so she was hesitant to get close to someone new. That was until she met Mike. As she slowly opened up to him, she shared stories about her previous, including her difficult past with her ex-husband, Kieran. To move forward, Susan knew she needed to finalize her divorce. Despite being nervous about Kieran's unpredictable behavior, she decided to take the first step by texting him to meet at a cafe to discuss their divorce. To her surprise, the encounter went smoothly. Kieran seemed to accept the idea of a divorce. And for once, they had a friendly conversation, reminiscing about their past experiences. They even exchanged kind text messages afterward, with Kieran expressing happiness for Susan's new relationship and Susan hoping he would find love soon. However, the next day, Susan received a barrage of messages from Kieran, and his attitude toward the divorce had taken a drastic turn. He now acted like he didn't care about his ex-wife, but he still had some demands. He wanted $60,000 in exchange for signing the divorce papers. Kieran argued that he had already left her the house and its contents, and therefore, he was entitled to compensation. But what worried her was Kieran's attitude in letting her move on. He couldn't stand the thought of another man replacing him. His texts even reveal a dark desire, her demise. At first, Kieran only threatened through text messages, but then he showed it through actions. He appeared in Susan's yard with a hammer, while she was home alone with her pet. Susan quickly called to request emergency assistance. By the time the police arrived, Kieran had already damaged some flower pots and outdoor decorations, but he had left the scene. 2 officers entered the property and listened to Susan's account. Kieran returned, loudly proclaiming his intent to confront his ex-wife, Susan, and said that no one could stop him. The police arrested Kieran for disturbing the peace. Even in handcuffs, he continued to insult his ex-wife. As a result, Kieran faced charges on 3 counts, making life-threatening actions, carrying a dangerous object, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, Kieran appeared in magistrate's court and denied all allegations against him. He was scheduled to appear in court again on March 29 and was released on bail under the condition that he avoid contact with Susan and stay away from her home. However, this decision left Susan and her daughters feeling uneasy and questioning the law's effectiveness in protecting them. Kieran disregarded the bail conditions and continued to contact Susan, violating the no-contact order. He repeatedly called her and even showed up at her residence, which intensified her fear for her safety. He falsely claimed to mutual friends that Susan's new boyfriend was sending him provocative messages. Kieran also targeted his daughters by contacting them, knowing they would inform Susan about his actions. Susan was on high alert at all times, worried about leaving her children alone due to Kieran's persistent calls, which sometimes exceeded 80 a day. These frequent calls often involved threats of him showing up at her location. When Kieran failed to comply with his bail conditions, Susan contacted the authorities again. During this time, Kieran made a concerning call to the emergency services and revealed that he tried to end his life but did not have the courage to do so. A team of psychologists and police officers was sent to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Kieran assured them he was fine, and as a result, he was advised to schedule an appointment with his family doctor. At the time, he did not appear to have any mental health problems. Kieran continued to harass Susan and family with calls and messages. He took invading their personal space. He snuck into the garage and cut off the power supply. He also tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's, Jennifer, house and would sometimes lurk under the windows at night. His actions caused fear in Susan, their daughters, and even her elderly mother, Jennifer. Despite Susan's repeated pleas for help, but the police were of no help to her. When they arrived, they took statements and promised to make an arrest Kieran, but they failed to do so. The police considered this a normal dispute between people going through a divorce, and they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. However, things took a darker turn when Kieran contacted his eldest daughter and made threats to sexually assault her. When Susan found out, she was horrified. The police launched a search for Kieran at his home but couldn't find him. They advised Susan and her daughters to go to a friend's house or to Jennifer's house to avoid having to stay home alone. Youngest daughter Matilda stayed at a friend's house, while the oldest daughter, Molly, went to visit her grandmother, Jennifer, who lived alone after her husband passed away. Molly and her grandmother, Jennifer, spent a peaceful evening together, watching TV, drinking tea, and chatting. For a short time, they were able to forget about Kieran's threatening behavior. However, when they went to bed, the phone started ringing. When Jennifer answered, there was complete silence on the other end, and she thought it was a wrong number. Nevertheless, the phone continued to ring repeatedly. Susan and Molly were anxious and uneasy due to the phone calls this continuous. Molly felt like someone was hiding in the garden. A shadowy figure appeared outside against the dark background. For safety, Molly locked themselves in the bathroom with Jennifer. It was around 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Susan's phone was flooding with more calls and texts, so she also contacted the police for help. Unfortunately, the police had limited resources and couldn't keep a constant watch for the person making the calls. They advised Susan to turn off her phone and make sure all doors and windows were securely locked. In the past 24 hours, the police had received 6 ask-for-help calls. However, the authorities claimed they didn't have enough personnel to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as her granddaughter left the house, Susan decided to visit her mother, Jennifer. She wanted to offer her mother comfort and reassurance, and she promised her mother that she would not stand by while her family was bullied and threatened by someone who did not accept their divorce. At 72, Jennifer stepped out into the garden with her dog, enjoying the warm daylight. From inside, her daughter Susan watched with a smile, happy to see her mother happy. Abruptly, a loud noise was heard from outside at 10:48 a.m. Kieran entered the garden with a container of flammable liquid. He yelled angry insults at his mother-in-law, Jennifer. Then he approached Jennifer, pouring the liquid on her head, face, and back. Jennifer was terrified and screamed as he continued. Susan quickly called the emergency services, asking for help. The operator told her to run out into the street to get away from Kieran, which she did right away. Susan sprinted to the end of the street and looked back, but no one was chasing her. Remembering her mother was still in the garden, she quickly turned around to return home. Just then, Kieran poured the remaining liquid on himself and lit it with a lighter. Flames erupted, engulfing he and Jennifer. Police, firefighters, and medical staff, along with an ambulance, quickly arrived at the scene. When Susan returned to her mother's garden, she was horrified by what she saw. Her mother and Kieran were badly disfigured. Her mother, Jennifer, had severe burns. Her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were completely gone. And her skin was badly charred. Despite being in agony, Jennifer made it clear to Susan how much she loved her and that Susan and her children meant everything to her. Even in her critical condition, Jennifer tried to comfort Susan, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Kieran was severely injured with burns covering his entire body. He was sitting against a wall, gasping for air and still smoldering from the fire. Susan was consumed by grief and anger, lashing out at Kieran for his actions. She was struggling to understand how the man she once married could cause so much harm to her mother, whom she loved and protected dearly, and couldn't fathom how their relationship had ended in such a tragic way. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of trying to kill Jennifer Cronin. Both Kieran and Jennifer were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. A few hours after the attack, Susan was called in for an interview to help figure out what happened. It was discovered that Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer with a flammable liquid and set them on fire in the garden. Kieran, a 50-year-old man, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, Susan. She had repeatedly informed the authorities about his aggressive behavior, which was made worse by his use of illegal drugs. However, due to a lack of police resources, the situation spiraled out of control, leading to disastrous consequences. As a result, the incident quickly gained media attention, and the lack of decisive action by law enforcement was heavily criticized. The medical team informed Susan that Kieran's condition was extremely serious, with severe burns covering almost his entire body. This devastating news affected his daughters deeply, who remembered their father as a loving and caring person. One of them wanted to visit him one last time before he passed away. However, due to the extent of his injuries, only the tip of his nose was recognizable, and it had turned black from the burns. During this final visit, the daughter expressed her love for her father and mourned the tragic circumstances. A toxicology report later revealed that Kieran's body contained both alcohol and illicit substances. Meanwhile, Jennifer was also fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering about a third of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. Despite undergoing surgical procedures, her chances of recovery were low due to the severity of her injuries. Susan visited her mother, Jennifer, in the hospital frequently, where she saw her mother's immense suffering. As the situation seemed hopeless, Susan had come to accept that her mother's passing was near and wished for her to be with her late husband, free from pain and discomfort. Unfortunately, Susan's mother only had a short time left. After 17 days, she passed away on March 30, 2018, at 1332, with her family by her side. Although her time was almost up, her face remained peaceful. Susan held her mother's hand as she took her last breath, bringing an end to her mother's life on Earth. On January 21, 2019, an in-depth investigation began at County Hall in Chelmsford, aiming to understand the incidents that led to the deaths of Jennifer Cronin, 72, and Kieran Lynch, 50. Susan, who was deeply affected by these losses, initially felt angry towards her ex-husband, Kieran. However, the investigation showed that law enforcement did not handle the situation well, so Susan's anger shifted towards them. Although Susan was aware of Kieran's unstable behavior, she had not anticipated that it would result in harm to her family. Susan publicly expressed her dissatisfaction with the authorities' handling of their situation, criticizing the police for their inadequate response and unkept promises. Specifically, she pointed out that Kieran's failure to be held accountable for breaching his bail conditions contributed to the tragic outcome of Jennifer's life. Susan hoped that this incident would serve as a lesson to the authorities, preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. She emphasized that the police have a fundamental responsibility to protect and serve the community, a duty that she felt was severely neglected in her family's case. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Chauhan family. Amarjit Chauhan, the owner of Chiba Freight, a thriving fruit import business near Heathrow Airport. To those around him, Amarjit appeared to be a devoted family man and a kind employer, loved by his staff, and sharing a happy life with his wife and 2 young children. Amarjit viewed his employees as a part of his family. To show his appreciation to them during the busy time of the company, he would often treat them to pizza and drinks. He also maintained a calm and approachable leadership style, which earned him great respect from everyone. Amarjit's employees were concerned about the company's future if he were to move to India, a recurring subject in conversations with his wife Nancy. She hoped that Amarjit, who was 46, would soon be able to retire, allowing them to spend more time with their children. Nancy often told her husband about her desire to return to India. As time went by, Amarjit began to consider Nancy's wish and started thinking about selling their business to move back to their hometown. The plan might have worked if Amarjit Chauhan's ownership of Chiba Freight had not run into trouble. However, someone had his eye on the company Amarjit's and was looking to take control of it without investing any money. In January 2003, Kenneth, who had just been released from prison, looked for a job at Chiba Freight. Amarjit, the company's owner, who had also had his own run-ins with the law due to tax evasion, could relate to Kenneth's struggles. Knowing how hard it could be for people to find work after being out prison, Amarjit was willing to give Kenneth a chance, which was consistent with his reputation for being understanding and easygoing. Amarjit decided to offer Kenneth a second chance by hiring him as a driver. Kenneth turned out to be a diligent worker, unafraid to tackle any task, and performed his duties excellent. Kenneth was more than just a driver normally. However, in the past, he was an expert smuggler, nicknamed Captain Cash. By the late 1990s, Kenneth had built up a reputation as a veteran criminal, running various freight companies, which served as fronts to hide his real business, smuggling illegal drugs into the UK. He had risen to prominence in London's underworld and mingled with influential figures in the criminal world. Despite his modest demeanor, Kenneth led a life of luxury, perceiving himself as a wealthy socialite and a renowned figure in the global underworld. In 1997, at the peak of his illicit activities, Kenneth met Belinda Bruin, a socialite, at an upscale London bar. He flaunted his wealth, driving a Mercedes and showering her with expensive gifts. She saw him as sophisticated and charming, albeit a bit rough around the edges, a man who impeccably showed off his luxury watches and wasn't afraid to display his wealth. Often seen carrying a briefcase full of cash, Kenneth believed this extravagant lifestyle would boost his social standing. Unbeknownst to her, Belinda Bruin drawn into Kenneth's world of crime and deception. Kenneth becomes intensely infatuated with Belinda. He calls and emails her constantly, professing his feelings, as if he were a lovesick teenager. Even though they only have a superficial acquaintance, Kenneth tells others that Belinda is his girlfriend, this thing's leaving Belinda confused. Kenneth was arrested on June 17, 1998, in possession of 25 kilograms of a white substance, which put him at risk of receiving a prison sentence of up to 18 years. However, Kenneth chose to cooperate with the authorities and his testimony helped convict 12 major criminals. As a result, his own sentence was significantly reduced. 4 years later, Kenneth being released from prison, he found himself with nothing, no friends, no money, and his assets had been seized. When faced with these hardships, he moves into a small house, with his father, determined to find the way to regain his lost wealth and status. Kenneth, looking to get back into the illicit drug trade, targeted Amarjit Chauhan's company Chiba Freight is the perfect stepping stone for his return. He carefully devised a plan to take control of the company, carrying it out so meticulously that no one suspected anything. Once inside the company, Kenneth learned from co-workers that Amarjit was considering selling Chiba Freight to move abroad. Seizing the opportunity, Kenneth approached Amarjit with a fake story, offering a deal worth $4 million to grab his attention. While Amarjit thought over the proposal, Kenneth continued with his plan, seeking to use Chiba Freight for more than just business. Meanwhile, Kenneth also set his sights on Belinda, who had moved to Devon to escape him during his time in prison. He reached out to her again with a business proposal, knowing she was struggling financially. After her husband left, she was shouldering their responsibilities alone, finding it increasingly difficult to afford her house, the mortgage, and the high costs of sending her children to a private school. When she responded, Kenneth told her about his plan to take over Chiba Freight and suggested she join the company as a director. Despite lacking experience, he offered her a salary of $54,000 for working only 2 days a week, amounting to $68,000 per year. Belinda took advantage of the opportunity and negotiated a higher salary of $72,000, nearly $9,000 more, which Kenneth agreed to without hesitation. Kenneth to visit Belinda at her rural home in Devon under the guise of discussing a job. To justify these visits, he made up reasons, such as needing her signature on a document or help with paperwork. However, Kenneth's real interest lay in the land surrounding Belinda's home, an interest that soon became clear. He began to express concerns to Belinda about the condition of the path leading to the house, suggesting various improvements. These included removing certain trees, building a wall with electric gates, and installing a drainage system. At first, it seemed Kenneth was motivated by a desire to beautify the property for Belinda's benefit. But this might not have been his true intention. In February, Unearthed made a critical decision regarding the future of his company. He chose to engage with buyers to discuss a possible sale. Before leaving, Unearthed informed his employees that he would be visiting Stonehenge, but gave no further details. Additionally, he promised to keep them personally updated on the progress of the sale company. Unfortunately, this meeting would be the last time his employees saw him, and his unexplained disappearance soon became a matter of concern. On a Monday morning, the staff of Chiba Freight gathered together, only to be met with a shocking announcement. Kenneth unexpectedly introduced Belinda as the new owner of the company, catching everyone off guard and raising many questions. The employees were left wondering what had happened to Unearthed, why he hadn't said goodbye, and what the future company. Then, Kenneth presented a letter that he claimed was from Unearthed. According to the letter, Unearthed had decided to sell the company due to poor health and was relocating abroad with his family. Notably, the staff confirmed that the signature on the letter belonged to Unearthed. The company's success and surge in orders left the team too busy to worry about what the future held. As a result, they stopped discussing their concerns and focused on their work. Belinda was given a desk and computer in the office and started studying the company's finances as instructed by Kenneth. However, she felt unwell on her second day and decided to leave for her home in Devon without waiting for Kenneth's approval. When she arrived, she was shocked to see an old, run-down Jaguar parked by the road and two men, William Hornsey and Peter Rees, who were associated with Kenneth, digging a drainage ditch on her property. This unexpected discovery made her extremely uncomfortable. Belinda confronted Kenneth as soon as he arrived at her property, expressing her frustration and anger over the unauthorized excavation work he had done. She told him she didn't need a drainage ditch, but Kenneth claimed that he did it just to surprise her and assured her everything would be sorted out by summer. However, their plans were put on hold when the Metropolitan Police started a new investigation into the situation. In 2003, Kenneth, who had previously been convicted for drug trafficking, are rebuilding his luxurious life. After Unearthed, the former owner of the Chiba Freight, disappeared, Kenneth took over the company, using it as a cover for his smuggling operation. For 5 years, Kenneth had secretly admired the Belinda, and now that she was involved in his operation, it seemed like all his dreams were coming true. But the foundation of his empire was about to be exposed. Onkar Varma, a journalist based in New Zealand, was eagerly awaiting a reunion with his 25-year-old sister, Nancy, who lived in London with her husband, Amarjit Chauhan, and their 2 young children. This visit was especially significant, as Onkar and Nancy hadn't seen each other in 9 years. Onkar would frequently talk to Nancy and their mother to discuss activities and plan his upcoming visit. However, on February 15, 2003, Onkar attempted to contact Nancy and his mother, but neither of them responded. Initially, he thought they might be on a trip, but as the days passed without any response, Onkar grew increasingly concerned. This was unusual because they had not mentioned any travel plans to him, and his visit was just 5 days away. Concerned for his family's safety, Onkar contacted the Metropolitan Police for help. When Police Scotland Yard visited the family's residence, they found it empty. Neighbors and colleagues speculated that the family might have returned to their home country, India. However, further updates from Police Officer Scotland Yard increased Onkar's anxiety for his sister, mother, and nephews. His concern turned into fear, prompting him to decide on traveling to the UK to personally investigate the disappearance of his family. Upon arrival in London, Onkar felt isolated in an unfamiliar city. He went to the Chauhan household in Hounslow, expecting a warm welcome. Instead, he was shocked by a sight that left him in utter disbelief. At first glance, the home looked normal, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment. But the reality was very different. Closer inspection revealed that the family had been gone for weeks. The laundry was still in the washer, children's toys, and baby bottles with leftover food were scattered across the floor and kitchen counter, and food had spoiled. It looked like someone had been interrupted in the middle of washing dishes. While clothes and suitcases were neatly stored away, personal belongings were scattered throughout the three-bedroom house. The refrigerator still had food. But what devastated Onkar the most was finding his mother's cherished prayer book, a possession she always kept close and never left behind. Onkar was confused and worried about his sister's family, who had 2 young children, disappearing without a trace. It seemed unlikely that they had left their home by choice. Onkar convinced the authorities to launch an investigation. A team of experienced detectives from the Serious Crime Division took over the case. As time passed, Onkar lost hope of ever being reunited with his family, and their future plans will no longer be fulfilled. A massive search was launched to find the family of Amarjit Chauhan. The lead detective decides to question the person who last saw Amarjit on the day he disappeared. Kenneth, a former prisoner with a suspicious behavior, was the primary suspect. Kenneth tried to convince the police that Amarjit was not a trustworthy man and his financial troubles led him to run away on his own. Kenneth also told the police that Amarjit likely wanted to get rid of his business and was probably in another country by then. However, the investigators did not believe Kenneth's explanation. They used advanced forensic techniques to track the movement of Kenneth and Amarjit's cell phones on the day Amarjit disappeared. The investigation first located Amarjit's phone at his home, which then moved on to Stonehenge, where a business meeting was scheduled. It was at Stonehenge that Kenneth's phone connected with Amarjit's. And after that, both phones were tracked moving towards Devon. The detectives' only lead was that Belinda Bruin, the new head of Chiba Freight, lived in Devon, so they decided to pay her a visit. However, when the police talked about plans to search Belinda's piece of land, her partner, Kenneth, intervened. He was furious and tried to convince her not to allow the search, suggesting they meet somewhere else instead. Belinda refused to budge. Meanwhile, Kenneth's aide, William Hornsey, got in touch with the chief detective and claimed he had recently spoken with Amarjit. He said that Amarjit was apparently still in Britain. The authorities agreed to meet in Newport, Wales, near the passport agency, hoping to use this opportunity to uncover the truth behind Amarjit's disappearance. The authorities decided to cancel their plan to search Belinda's piece of land, as they needed to confirm in person that Amarjit was indeed safe to conclude the investigation. However, before the scheduled encounter at the passport agency on Monday, 3 men, Kenneth, William, and Peter, made an unexpected visit to Belinda's estate over the weekend, surprised Belinda. While there, they noticed a damaged path near the stable and decided to repair it with gravel. When a digger was later delivered to her estate, she took her children to the city, leaving the 3 men behind to repair that road. 2 days after, detectives went to the designated site to meet with Amarjit. When they arrived, they saw Hornsey and Kenneth's vehicle appear, stop briefly, and then leave as if the encounter had been cancelled. Kenneth went back to work at Chiba Freight, and the detectives decided to question Belinda again. Before this, Kenneth had warned her not to tell the police about the work he had done on her land. However, Belinda found his warning strange and decided to tell the investigators about it. She explained that some of Kenneth's associates had gone onto her farm without permission and dug a drainage trench, even though she hadn't asked for it. Belinda had unknowingly assisted the police significantly. The detectives quickly traveled to Devon, where they conducted excavations and thorough forensic tests with the help of experts. They searched through on piece of land Belinda's for 5 days, thinking they would find the remains of Amarjit and his family. However, nothing was discovered. After searching for more than 2 months, in April 2003 police realized that they had been searching in the wrong location. In the popular British holiday town of Bournemouth, Dorset, along the English Channel, a father and son, Dave and Carl, had planned the canoe trip for the evening. The sea was calm, The breeze was refreshing, and the climate ideal for a leisurely paddle. As they made their way through the water, they noticed something large floating in the distance. As they drew closer, they realized it was a badly decomposed body, severely swollen from being in the water for an extended period, making it hard to determine the person's sex. Carl quickly paddled back to shore to alert the authorities while his father, Dave, stayed with the body. Dave was left waiting alone in the darkness for nearly 3 hours, as he waited for help to arrive. This harrowing experience would forever be etched in their memories. The body was later taken to a morgue in Bournemouth, but it took almost a week to identify it. The deceased was Amarjit Chauhan, a missing entrepreneur who had suffered severe head injuries and had his mouth taped shut. The autopsy revealed that he likely died from the head trauma and suffocation. His clothes were removed for forensic examination. Meanwhile, police searched for more clues 62 meters away in Belinda's field and made a significant discovery, including a pile of charred clothes, jewelry, and strands of hair that were later confirmed to belong to Amarjit, as well as pieces of children's clothing. Initial investigations suggested that a family of 5 might be buried at the site. The once private property in Devon, owned by Belinda, was secretly used as a burial ground for the Amarjit Chauhan family. When police became suspicious, the bodies were exhumed and taken by boat to the middle of the bay in Bournemouth, where they were dumped into the sea. Until a body was found, the staff at Chiba Freight held on to the hope that their employer might return Sunday, even if he had sold the business, as they expected him to say goodbye or make a visit in the future. However, all hopes shattered when the drowned man was confirmed as Amarjit. The situation worsened as concern for the remaining family members grew. Nancy was merely 25 years old, and their children were just infants. The thought that someone could extinguish so many innocent lives was harrowing, yet all evidence pointed tragically in that direction. The excavation area was disproportionately large for the concealment of just one corpse. A smaller site would suffice for hiding a single individual. Furthermore, the simultaneous disappearance of Amarjit, along with Nancy, mother-in-law Chiranjit, and children, Ravinder Va Devinder, suggested a tragic end. The investigation becoming a high-priority case because very serious crimes. Kenneth became the main suspect, but he and his accomplice, William, had disappeared. Initial information suggested that Kenneth and William had fled to Europe, leaving their associate, Peter Rees, behind. Peter Rees, a 39 years old, feeling intense guilt over his crime, unexpectedly confessed to a stranger he had just met about the circumstances of the Amarjit family's tragic end. His confession was likely driven by a fear of being blamed entirely, as he couldn't believe his accomplice Kenneth would harm 2 innocent children. The stranger reported this information to the authorities, and Peter was arrested 12 days later. However, once in custody, Peter maintained his silence during police questioning, leaving the whereabouts and fate of the Amarjit Chauhan family a mystery. 3 weeks after the Amarjit body discovery, another body was found in the Solent, a part of the English Channel. Onkar was asked to identify the remains, which he recognized as those of his older sister, Nancy, despite the significant decomposition. The main suspects were eventually caught. Kenneth was arrested in Belgium after 2 months on the run, while William turned himself in 6 weeks later. However, even with the 3 suspects in custody, they refused to cooperate with the investigation. Despite the arrests, the case was still unsolved because 3 members of the Chauhan family were missing and there were no eyewitnesses to their murders. The investigation now needed irrefutable evidence to move forward. The detectives were unaware that Amarjit had left behind a crucial piece of evidence. In April 2005, the longest criminal trial in British history began, with the prosecution aiming to prove that Kenneth, William, and Peter were responsible for the kidnapping and murder of the Chauhan family. Over the course of the 10-month trial, more than 4,500 physical evidence items were examined. However, the analysis of phone communications formed the core of the prosecution's case. Unearthed had initially met with Kenneth to discuss the sale of the company, but he was kidnapped and held captive at Kenneth's home. There, he was forced to sign documents that would make it seem to his employees that he had sold the business and moved abroad. A significant piece of evidence emerged when the son of William handed over a gray suitcase to the police containing A4 sheets signed by Unearthed. Reagan initially planned to kill only Unearthed, but he realized that this would likely prompt the rest of the family to raise an alarm. As a result, he decided to target the entire family. On the day of the murder, Peter was tasked with keeping an eye on Unearthed, while Kenneth and another accomplice, William, went to the family's home in London. They stayed there for several hours, but exactly how they killed the other family members remains unclear. Unearthed was killed at Kenneth's home, which was then thoroughly renovated, including replacing all the furniture to destroy any evidence. 8 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists re-examined Unearthed's clothing. They found a folded letter in his right sock. The letter was addressed to Kenneth and dated February 12, 2003, proving that Unearthed had been at Kenneth's residence on the day he disappeared. Unbeknownst to his killers, Unearthed had intentionally left behind this clue. This crucial piece of evidence ultimately helped the police in their investigation. A lengthy 9-month trial ended with the jury's unanimous verdict. Peter Rees was sentenced to 23 years in prison for murdering Unearthed Chauhan. Meanwhile, Kenneth Reagan and William Hornsey each received 5 consecutive life sentences for the murders Nancy, Chiranjit Kaur, Ravinder Va Devinder, ensuring they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Later, the remains of Chiranjit Kaur, Unearthed's mother-in-law, were found off the coast of the Isle of Wight. Unfortunately, the bodies of the 2 young children, 18 months old Devinder and 2 months old Ravinder, were never recovered. It's often difficult to comprehend how someone could commit such atrocities against children. Typically, individuals who carry out these acts have psychological issues or are unaware of the severity of their actions. However, this was not the case with Kenneth, he to be mentally sound. For him, the brutal acts he committed were simply a means to achieve his goals, and he showed no hesitation in taking innocent lives in pursuit of his own ambitions. Was profoundly affected by incident. He now lives in New Zealand, permanently separated from his nephews. A family video, recorded just 2 days before they disappeared, was found in their empty home. This heartbreaking video is the last remaining testament to a once joyful family torn apart by tragedy. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Paget. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania, where she spent her entire life. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. However, her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was young. Her mother later remarried, and Jessica formed a close bond with her stepfather, whom she considered her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, Jessica attended college to study preschool education. It was during this time that she met her future husband, Michael Paget. They began dating, moved in together, and had 2 children over the course of their 8-year relationship. Although they didn't get married until August 2014, Michael was a caring father and husband. However, like any family, they experienced ups and downs in their relationship. Jessica was happy with Michael, but just 4 months after their wedding, she vanished. Before her disappearance, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. She loved her job, as she was passionate about working with children and had a natural ability to connect with them. The children adored her, and she enjoyed spending time with them. On November 21, 2014, Jessica dropped off her older children at school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten. It was a typical day, with no indication of the trouble that was to come. Jessica asked her administrator if she could take a short break from work to send a fax to her mother's house in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator agreed, and Jessica left her son at kindergarten before driving to her mother's house. She was expected to return to work within 30 minutes, but an hour passed and she didn't come back. Her colleagues tried calling her, but she didn't answer. When Jessica failed to return, the kindergarten administrator contacted her husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she was. Michael said he was at work and hadn't heard from her. He tried calling her, but all his calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Jessica as she always answered calls from her family. Michael then called his mother-in-law, Danelle, who was in Florida, to see if Jessica had contacted her. However, Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day and was immediately worried. She suggested that Michael call her husband, Greg, who was Jessica's stepfather, to see if he had any information. However, Greg reported that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jessica that day. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica's relatives grew increasingly worried. After numerous failed attempts to contact her, Danelle took a flight to Pennsylvania to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, for hours after Jessica disappeared from work, her husband Michael reported her missing to the police. He expressed his concern that Jessica would never leave their children voluntarily, leading him to fear the worst. The police promptly launched an investigation, distributing Jessica's description to all nearby stations. She was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 130 pounds, with a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with the words "Duck, Duck, Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. A thorough search of local hospitals and morgues yielded no results. Detectives worked to determine Jessica's whereabouts, interviewing her co-workers in the process. However, everyone they spoke to reported that Jessica had no enemies and was well liked by her colleagues, children, and their parents. According to her co-workers, Jessica seemed fine when she left work at lunchtime, and they noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, the police were able to locate her phone signal, which indicated that it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data was not entirely accurate due to inherent location determination errors, it provided a general area for the police to focus their search. However, by the time they began searching, it was already nighttime. The police found Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, in a nearby parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked and empty, with her purse, documents, and bank cards still inside. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone was on the passenger seat next to her purse. There were no signs of a crime in the car, leaving the police with several unanswered questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? To answer these questions, the police sought CCTV footage. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street had captured the area where Jessica's car was found. After reviewing the footage with the store manager, the police saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m. She got out of the car and stood by the driver's door for a short time before leaving and not returning. The investigators were baffled by Jessica's disappearance, as she had left behind her documents, phone, and keys. It was unclear whether she had intentionally gone into hiding. Surveillance footage showed Jessica walking between 2 buildings towards another parking lot, where she vanished from view due to the lack of cameras. To get a better look at the footage, the investigators made a copy of the video to review on a larger screen at the police station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, enlisted the help of the Pennsylvania State Police to coordinate a search effort. Flyers with Jessica's photo were distributed throughout Northampton and surrounding cities, as well as shared on social media and through local news outlets. state police detectives began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff, who revealed that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house. The detectives then visited the house, which was approximately 4 miles from the kindergarten, in search of answers. The detectives met with Danelle and her husband Greg at the scene, and learned that Jessica had keys to their home and could visit at any time. On the day of her disappearance, both Danelle and Greg had been out, Danelle in Florida and Greg elsewhere, which left uncertainty about Jessica's activities at the house. They also checked Greg's fax machine for records of usage, but found that the device was faulty, which didn't provide any clear information. Jessica might have used another fax machine, but it still didn't explain why she had left her belongings in her car. The detectives decided to speak with Jessica's husband Michael, as husbands are often suspects in such cases. To confirm Michael's story that he was the first to leave the house on the day Jessica disappeared, detectives investigated his claim. It was a possibility they couldn't rule out, as statistically, a significant number of disappearances involve a partner. As they continued the investigation, the police arranged a search party, and local media alerted the public about Jessica's disappearance. Anyone with information was asked to come forward. By this point, 48 hours had passed, but no new leads emerged on Jessica's journey to her mother's house. To aid in their investigation, detectives scoured the route to her mother's house for surveillance cameras. One key location, an Exxon gas station adjacent to the main road leading to the mother's residence, had multiple cameras installed. Given the fact that this gas station was strategically situated on Jessica's stated route, the police logically inferred that if Jessica drove in the direction she said, she would be captured on camera. A review of the recording showed that her car was, indeed, captured driving by at approximately 12:56 p.m. From there, the journey to her mother's house took just a few minutes, suggesting Jessica would need to make the short trip back in order to utilize a functional fax machine, which wasn't operational at her mother's home. While fast-forwarding the tape to find a shot of the vehicle's potential return, detectives made a perplexing observation. The footage shows Jessica's white car speeding through a gas station just 14 minutes later. Notably, the car took a peculiar route, turning towards the gas station and continuing onto the other side without stopping, before heading towards the city center, where the car was later abandoned in a parking lot. Given her rapid pace, the likely reason for this unusual detour was a red traffic light at the intersection, which Jessica may have attempted to avoid by cutting through the gas station. From there, she drove onto a different road where the light was green and eventually left her car in the parking lot, where a police officer discovered it later. However, a surprising detail emerged upon closer inspection of the footage. Jessica, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 130 pounds, appeared to be much shorter and lighter than the person seen exiting her car. Measuring against the known height of the car, experts estimated that this person stood between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches tall. Moreover, during their examination of the abandoned car, the police noticed that the driver's seat was pushed forward, which would make it uncomfortable for someone taller than 5 feet 11 inches to operate the vehicle comfortably. The police initially found it suspicious that the driver's seat was positioned for someone of Jessica's height. However, after reviewing the footage, they discovered that the person who got out of the car had adjusted the seat to its most forward position, attempting to make it seem like Jessica was driving. But this raised another question: who was the tall person seen in the footage? Michael. He stood at around 6 feet tall. The police brought him in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives verified his alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. The evidence confirmed that Michael was indeed at work at the time, which meant the person in the footage was not him. For days had passed since Jessica's disappearance, and her children were struggling to cope with the stress and uncertainty. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no leads had been found. Investigators re-examined the footage of someone exiting Jessica's car, but the person's identity remained a mystery. However, upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a detail they had previously missed. A minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, left the scene. This new information led the police to Greg, Jessica's stepfather, who matched the suspect's height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police requested that Greg come to the station for questioning, leaving him shocked and dismayed to be considered a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. Greg claimed that he had left his car at a service center for repairs and that a neighbor had given him a ride there to pick it up. He then stated that he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat. However, the police obtained CCTV footage from the gas station, which showed Greg driving past the station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. It turned out that Greg had lied about stopping at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Greg's entire story was fabricated. His neighbor denied driving him to the service center, contradicting Greg's claim. This led detectives to suspect that Greg might have been involved in Jessica's disappearance. By piecing together the evidence, investigators concluded that Greg was likely at home when Jessica arrived. It's possible that something happened, and Greg drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center. The police searched Greg's house, where they found evidence that contradicted his alibi. The fax machine, which Greg claimed was not working, was found to be functional, and its usage history showed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day of her disappearance. Furthermore, a trash can in the basement contained napkins with bloodstains, and Greg's shoes, which were found in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them. Donnell reported to the police that Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day before, which seemed unusual at the time, especially since the trash can wasn't full. In hindsight, this could be how Greg disposed of evidence related to cleaning products and rags used in the house. During a second interrogation, the police confronted Greg, stating that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found evidence in his home. They also informed him that they were aware Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. Greg then began to talk. Greg claimed that when he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st, he found Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. He alleged that Jessica was already dead when he arrived and that he panicked, fearing no one would believe him. He supposedly drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot and then returned home. Greg also stated that Jessica had outstanding debts, which he claimed led to her death. However, detectives later discovered that this was another lie, and they found evidence that Greg had purchased adult toys the day before Jessica disappeared. The investigators were fed up with Greg's inconsistent stories, so they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter Jessica's body, explaining that an autopsy would provide answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Greg changed his story again. This time, he claimed he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked to send a fax. According to Greg, he was standing behind her as she used the computer, and he became aroused and developed a desire for his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he allegedly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he moved Jessica's body to the bedroom. Greg then drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center, where he had previously left his Ford for repairs. To mislead investigators, he adjusted the seat to make it appear as though Jessica was driving. What Greg said next shocked the investigators. After returning home, he set up a video camera near the bed and recorded a video of himself with Jessica's body. The police later found this disturbing video on Greg's computer. Greg confessed to wrapping his stepdaughter Jessica's body in a blanket and hiding it in a ravine near his home. He claimed he was not a bad person, but had lost control. After the crime, Greg's life fell apart. He lost his business, home, dogs, and wife. However, he never mentioned the loss of Jessica. Jessica's mother, Danelle, was shocked to discover that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible. The authorities announced Jessica's death, stating that she was a victim of homicide. The district attorney, John Morganelli, expressed skepticism about Greg's version of events, but believed there was a sexual motive behind the crime. The prosecutor's office examined the evidence to determine if Greg had planned the attack. Jessica's family released a statement thanking law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. They described Jessica as a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was loved by her family and friends, and stated that her loss made the world a darker place. Gregory Gregg, 53, was charged with the murder of Jessica Padette. Initially, investigators suspected that Greg had tried to persuade Jessica into a romantic encounter, but when she refused, he killed her to avoid exposure. However, this theory was difficult to prove due to the lack of defensive wounds on Jessica's body. She died from a single wound to the back of her head, which corroborated Greg's testimony. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty, but since Jessica was already dead when he committed the second part of the crime, the prosecution could not pursue the death penalty. An examination of Greg and Jessica's computers and phones revealed no evidence of a relationship beyond that of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli noted that Greg's lawyer, John McMahon Jr., failed to submit the results of a mental health evaluation for Greg. McMahon claimed that he had Greg evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation found that Greg did not have a diminished mental capacity, so McMahon did not use it in the trial. During the trial, the jury was forced to watch a disturbing 6-minute video that Greg had recorded, which showed him committing heinous crimes using adult toys he had purchased the day before. The jury was reluctant to view the video, but the judge ruled that they were obligated to watch it before reaching a verdict. Greg's lawyer argued that the crime was not premeditated and that his client should be charged with a third-degree crime rather than a first-degree crime. In response, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli presented the video as evidence to prove that the crime was, in fact, premeditated. Morganelli explained that this was necessary to convince the jurors of Greg's guilt, despite the disturbing nature of the footage. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes, finding Gregory Gregg guilty of taking Jessica's life and desecrating her body. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he had any final words, Gregg simply replied, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." Following the sentencing, the judge advised the jurors to seek counseling from a psychologist to cope with the traumatic case. Jessica's husband, Michael, spoke to reporters, expressing the difficulty of moving on without his beloved wife and raising their 3 children alone. He described Jessica as the most wonderful person he had ever met. In a separate matter, Danelle, Greg's wife, has initiated divorce proceedings. However, the process is proving to be complex and Greg is hindering her efforts. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Shil Kovlin. Shil Kovlin grew up on the west side of Manhattan. Shelley's life was marked by a love of learning and academic excellence, earning a degree in wealth management. This degree opened the door to a successful career in Swiss banking. Shil's career flourished, and she became skilled at managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for her clients. However, despite her professional success and financial security, Shil felt unfulfilled. She longed to start a family of her own and become a mother. In an effort to change her circumstances, Shil attended a Jewish singles event in February 1998, where she met a 26-year-old man named Rod Kovlin, who also worked in the banking sector. Shil and Rod were a young couple with many similar interests and ambitions. Their relationship developed quickly despite their significant age difference. They spent all their time together and then decided to get married. feeling that everything was just right. Some people thought they were rushing into marriage, but for Sheil and Rod, it was perfect. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and their family was complete. However, their happy life was shattered on New Year's Eve 2009 when Sheil died in a tragic accident. At first, the police thought it was just a freak accident. On December 30th, 2009, 2 police officers were finishing their night shift at a Manhattan police station. They received an emergency call from Rod Coughlin, Sheil's husband, who had called in a panic to report that he had found Sheil in her bathtub, submerged in blood, and that she was dead. He followed the police's instructions to pull her out of the water and attempt to resuscitate her. However, it soon became clear that his efforts to save her life would not be successful. As Sheil's body was cold and motionless, Rod Coughlin covered her with a blanket and waited for the police to arrive. Police quickly arrived and investigated the scene. Upon arrival, they assessed the situation and blocked off a downtown Manhattan street. Initially, officers suspected that Sheil's death may have been a suicide. Inside the apartment, the police found scattered children's toys. Proceeding to the bathroom, they discovered the Sheil wrapped in a blanket by her husband. The bloody water in the tub and the wet floor indicated that Rod Coughlin had recently pulled the body from the water. A bleeding wound on the back of Sheil's head was visible. Police found a torn hinge on the cabinet in the bathroom where Sheil died, suggesting she fell after losing her grip on the doorknob. Experts concluded there was no forced entry after checking around the house. The detective working the case decided to talk to the family members. During the interview, it was discovered that Sheil and Rod Coughlin's 9-year-old daughter was the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized and shocked by what she saw, she told the police what had happened. It turned out that the night before, she and her younger brother had slept in their mother's bed. Waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that her mother was not there, she went looking for her and stumbled upon the horrifying scene in the bathroom. She quickly called her father, Rod Coughlin, who had recently separated from his mother and was downstairs. He rushed into the bathroom, pulled his wife's body out of the water, and called emergency services. Her account of the events matched Rod Coughlin's, supporting the theory that her death was an accident. The police informed Sheil's family of the tragic event, leaving everyone in shock. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day. When the medical examiner contacted investigators to begin the examination, he was surprised to learn that this procedure would not take place, despite being necessary. This left the examiner confused. It was later discovered that a rabbi from Sheil's synagogue had intervened. The rabbi contacted an organization responsible for burying Orthodox Jews, who then asked the police for permission to enter the scene in accordance with the family's religious rites. The police granted permission and a team of rabbis arrived at the scene. They cleaned up the blood in the bathtub and prepared Sheil's body for burial, in accordance with the family's beliefs. Unfortunately, this process destroyed all evidence and clues before they could be examined by the police forensic department. Orthodox Jewish tradition considers autopsies unacceptable because they involve defiling the body of the deceased. The rabbi quickly stepped in to support Sheil's grieving family, who were grateful for the rabbi's help. As a result, the family agreed to forego an autopsy and organize funeral arrangements. Sheil was buried within 24 hours, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects. Sheil's parents questioned the cause of Sheil's death. Police told them that potential evidence had been destroyed during the cleanup. They thought that a fall in the bathtub would certainly have caused the accident. But the possibility of death from such an accident seemed unlikely. The family hired a private investigator to investigate the circumstances of her death and determine whether it was indeed an accident. The private investigator begins by going to the family home to talk to Sheil's relatives, and learns that Sheil's marriage to Rod Coughlin is having major problems. Their marriage began to fall apart after their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008. Rod Kovlin frequently changed jobs and developed a gambling addiction, spending a lot of money on gambling. Sheil felt neglected because Rod Kovlin spent a lot of time playing video games. Sheil was also frustrated by the amount of money Rod Kovlin's family spent on his frequent trips, and he was unfaithful to her. Sheil, after discovering his email cheating, she decided to end their marriage and began the process of getting a religious divorce. However, the formal divorce process will take some time to complete. Although they are separated and experiencing strain in their relationship, they has tried to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. Despite this effort, conflicts and disagreements between Sheil and Rod Kovlin continued to arise. Sheil had recently confided in her loved ones about her grievances with Rod Kovlin, characterizing him as aggressive and hot-tempered. She felt uneasy and monitored. The private detective suspected that Rod Kovlin might have been involved in his wife Sheil's death due to the complexities in their marital life. To investigate further, the detective aimed to determine if a crime had occurred at the scene where Sheil's body was found. He planned to inspect her apartment, but the door was sealed, requiring him to obtain a court order to gain access. Upon arriving at the scene with New York police officers, the detective attempted to unlock the door with a provided key, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, Rod Kovlin appeared from his apartment, claiming he had heard a noise and came to investigate. When questioned by the police and the detective, Rod Kovlin took the key and easily opened the door. This raised suspicions. Had Rod Kovlin genuinely heard a noise, or was he deliberately keeping an eye on the situation? The detective searched the apartment for evidence of murder. Sheil's family said she was home on December 31st, but her phone was missing. A phone charger was found, but not the phone that he paid particular attention to the hinges, which investigators believed she had ripped off during a fall. The more he examined them, the more he suspected that, with Sheil's strength, ripping off hinges that were firmly attached to the cabinet was impossible. The detective discussed his findings with the police, trying to convince them that Sheil's death was not an accident, but a murder. However, the police remained unconvinced, citing a lack of evidence. Therefore, they decided to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. This decision caused a difficult debate with Sheil's family. The exhumation took place 2 weeks after Sheil had been buried. Her loved ones were deeply distressed by the decision. In the Jewish faith, exhumation is considered negative and many religious leaders oppose the practice. The family needed time to think about their next steps. They felt the need to find out the truth about their daughter's death, so they agreed to exhume her body. However, the exhumation process was difficult, so the family had to apply for a special order from the prosecutor's office. Even with the family's consent, they still had to make sure that all the necessary paperwork was completed. Once all the paperwork was completed, they proceeded with the exhumation and autopsy. The autopsy results showed that Sheil did not die from a fall, but from strangulation, which caused her to suffocate and break her neck. The official cause of Sheil's death was revised, and it was no longer considered an accident. Instead, it was officially ruled a murder. The detective's suspicions and efforts were vindicated. The autopsy results were instrumental in prompting the New York Police Department to reopen the investigation into Sheil's death. Detectives began scrutinizing new evidence, including phone records and bank statements. They also interviewed everyone who had interacted with Rod Kovlin and Sheil. The attorney shared information about Rod Kovlin and Sheil during the first divorce hearing in May 2009. Rod Kovlin claimed that he could not afford the money because he was unemployed, but the judge said that he had to give up gambling and electronics. In court, Rod Kovlin's true nature was exposed, and he continued to criticize Sheil, making false accusations about her lifestyle, finances, and behavior toward their son. He even called Sheil's workplace to defame her. In the subsequent divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, the court banned Rod Coughlin from spending time alone with the children, a ban that remained in place even after Shields' death. The court also denied Rod Coughlin custody of the children and awarded custody to Rod Coughlin's parents through a social worker. This decision likely angered Rod Coughlin greatly. Police interviewed a former caregiver who had cared for Rod Coughlin's children before he fired her. It was discovered that on December 30th, Shill had received an expensive keratin hair treatment that cost hundreds of dollars. The care instructions emphasized avoiding humidity in high temperatures for several days, essentially prohibiting baths or showers. Shill's autopsy revealed no signs of bathing on the day of her death, leading investigators to speculate that she may not have taken a bath. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the building, which showed Rod Coughlin leaving his apartment at 4 a.m. on the day of the murder, dressed to go out. He returned a short time later. The building's security guard found this unusual, as Rod had never left the building that early. The security guard asked Rod Coughlin if he needed anything, but when he said no, Rod Coughlin returned with the chocolate bars and gave them to the security guard. Investigators believe that Rod Coughlin's actions were intentional to create an alibi, and as a result, he became the prime suspect. Shiel and Rod Coughlin were still married, which meant that absent a will or divorce, Rod Coughlin would inherit her estate, which was worth over $5 million. Additionally, on December 31, 2009, Shiel scheduled a meeting with her attorney to update her will and remove Rod Coughlin from the list of beneficiaries, which posed a significant threat to Rod Coughlin's rights and provided a clear motive for the crime. All of Shiel's assets were frozen in a safe deposit account. It is likely that Rod Coughlin knew about Shiel's plans to remove his name from her will, as he may have been monitoring her activities. A review of the surveillance footage revealed that Shiel had returned home at 8 p.m. the night before the crime, talking on her phone. However, the phone had gone missing after the crime. The investigators decided to conduct another search of the crime scene, and upon returning to the apartment, they quickly found Shiel's mobile phone lying on her bedside table, still connected to the charger. When questioned by the police, Rod Coughlin hired a lawyer, Ed, who advised him to remain silent. As a result, investigators had to continue searching for new evidence implicating Rod Coughlin. When they examined Rod Coughlin's phone records, they discovered frequent calls to the number of Deborah Holmes, a married woman with 3 children. 5 months before Shiel's murder, Rod Coughlin and Deborah met at a sick bow tournament and began a passionate affair. They often met at sick bow tournaments or played together online. Investigators saw an opportunity to gather information and decided to contact Deborah with a few questions. However, to their surprise, Deborah responded that her attorney had asked her not to cooperate. Faced with Deborah's refusal to speak, the police asked for the name of her attorney. The response revealed that Deborah and Rod Coughlin were the same attorney. As a last resort, the police searched Shiel's newly discovered phone for incriminating text messages or electronic communications between Rod and Deborah. All data had been completely erased by a professional. Even skilled programmers were unable to recover the deleted messages. Over time, it became clear that he had succeeded in evading justice. While his crimes may have been well executed, the rabbi's meticulous cleaning of the bathroom was a major factor in hampering the investigation. By removing all traces of blood and other evidence, they destroyed DNA, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to collect evidence. The case stalled because Rod Coughlin confessed to the crime, and a lack of evidence prevented the case from going to trial. 5 years have passed since the investigation into Shiel's death began, but no arrests have been made. Police have searched for clues and evidence of Rod Coughlin's involvement in Shiel's death for years, but to no avail. However, the case took a turn when Rod Coughlin's mistress, Deborah, came forward. She contacted the police, and they invited her to the station for questioning. Deborah had recently broken up with Rod Coughlin, which prompted her to contact the police. She shared information with the police that Rod Coughlin had conspired to gain custody of the children, but because he was a suspect in Shield's death and did not have custody of the children, he could not access the money Shield left behind. Rod Coughlin hatched a sinister plan to get his hands on Shield's fortune. Rod Coughlin planned to manipulate his 15-year-old daughter into falsely accusing her grandfather, Rod Coughlin's father, of assaulting her. This would result in the grandfather being imprisoned and losing custody of his granddaughter, and Rod Coughlin would give his daughter a large sum of money upon completion of the mission. Meanwhile, Rod Coughlin had been secretly withdrawing funds from the only account he had access to, which was meant for his children's education. His parents discovered that he was misusing the money and were extremely unhappy with his lack of concern for his children's well-being. This led to a heated dispute between Rod Coughlin and his parents. Rod Coughlin's anger towards his parents escalated to the point where he considered harming them. In 2012, he confided in his lover, Deborah, about his plan to have his daughter poison his parents' tea with rat poison. He believed that since his daughter was a minor, she would receive a lighter sentence if caught. Following this, Rod Coughlin came up with several other schemes. He considered burning down his parents' house and trapping them inside by jamming the doors. Rod Coughlin also thought about arranging a fake marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, which would have forced her to give up part of her inheritance to him. The police were shocked by the details of Rod Coughlin's plans. Deborah secretly collected evidence, storing a large amount of data on hard drives. Deborah realized she was dealing with a psychopath, and she waited until after she broke up with Rod Coughlin to share the evidence with the police. The recordings she collected of Rod Coughlin's conversations with various people. The police now had to listen carefully to these recordings to find conclusive evidence. Deborah's contribution to the investigation was crucial. As the investigators analyzed the recordings, they made a surprising discovery. In a conversation with a friend he met through backgammon, Rod Coughlin casually mentioned that he had keys to Shield's apartment and could enter it at any time. Investigators found that Rod Coughlin was plotting against his own daughter, planning to pin the responsibility for the Shield's demise on her. Thanks to all the information gathered, the police finally had compelling evidence to charge Rod Coughlin with the demise of his wife. On November 1, 2015, Rod Coughlin was arrested. Shield's family awaited the trial of their daughter's perpetrator, but victory was not assured. Rod Coughlin, while incarcerated, shared intimate details of his wife's murder with a fellow inmate. He even reenacted the strangulation, which matched the autopsy results. During the 7-week trial, the jury heard testimony about the heinous crimes he planned to commit, including murdering his wife, targeting his parents, and framing his own children. The jury was horrified by his cold-blooded nature. In March 2019, the court convicted Rod Coughlin of murdering his wife, Shield. Although there was no direct eyewitness, the overwhelming evidence led to a life imprisonment sentence. With the possibility of parole after 25 years, Rod Coughlin will no longer pose a threat to his family or the people of New York. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that she grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers, earned funds. The man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kimberly was a little girl, her parents divorced. The child was left to live with her mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she faced a choice to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she didn't want to move, the young lady decided to live with her father. Kimberly was very close to her father and enjoyed living with him. As she grew up, she became a well-behaved, sociable child and eventually a stunning young woman with a radiant smile that always lifted her spirits. She had a great sense of humor and a positive attitude. Kimberly was raised in a sheltered environment, surrounded by love and care, which protected her from the harsh realities of life. As a result, she only saw the good in people and was largely unaware of the darker aspects of life. Unfortunately, her open and kind nature would eventually lead to many sorrows. In 1994, Kimberly enrolled at the College of Staten Island. Shortly after, she told her father that she felt ready to live on her own. Although Mr. Kimberly was worried about her decision, he respected her independence and decided not to oppose it. He promised himself that he would do his best to ensure her safety and well-being in her new living arrangements. Kimberly bought a nice apartment for his daughter, located in a wealthy area of the city, and installed an alarm system to ensure her safety. He also purchased a parking space in the garage across the street so she wouldn't have to park far away. To stay in touch, he provided her with a cell phone and a pager. Kimberly did everything in his power to ensure his daughter's well-being. His concerns for her safety were well-founded, given his wealth and her limited life experience. Kimberly was a diligent student who also worked part-time as an accountant at a reputable firm. She had declined her father's offer to join the family business, opting instead to forge her own path. Kimberly led a typical student life, attending parties and socializing with friends. She declined her father's offers to return home, wanting to maintain independence. This led to an unexpected situation when she let friend Liz Pace and her family stay while their apartment was being renovated in early 1995. Kimberly, with a kind heart, invited young people to her lodging. They spent days having fun together. One day, Kimberly and a friend attended a party, getting ready and dressing up. After a fun night of dancing, Kimberly drove them home but didn't go up, citing unfinished business. They hugged goodbye, unaware they'd never see each other again. After visiting the police, Mr. Kimberly, Kimberly's father, went to the parking lot next to her house, only to find that her car was missing from the garage. As he looked around, he spotted a shiny object on the floor near the wall, a small gold earring. He recalled giving his daughter similar earrings and, just in case, picked it up. However, Kimberly was nowhere to be found in the apartment. Instead, he met her guests, including a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their 2-year-old child. Although Kimberly was aware of Kimberly's decision, he didn't agree with it. The tenants were worried about the hostess's absence and Joshua offered to help find her. He said he was looking for Kimberly and would assist later. Kimberly returned to the police station, explaining that his daughter had been in an accident, but the officers remained unconvinced. Kimberly decided to speak with Liz Pace, the last person to see Kimberly, and showed her the jewelry he had found. Liz Pace confirmed that she had seen Kimberly wearing those earrings on the night she disappeared. Kimberly then visited the places his daughter frequently went to, talking to many people, but didn't gather any significant information. Joshua suggested searching not only for Kimberly but also for her distinctive car. Kimberly went to the police station for the 3rd time, insisting that he wouldn't leave until they began a search. A detective eventually responded to his appeal, agreeing to take on the investigation despite the usual protocol. To better understand the events surrounding Kimberly Antonakis' disappearance, investigators started by reconstructing her activities on February 28. Kimberly began the day by attending college, followed by a few hours of work. After work, she returned home and had dinner with friends before heading out to a party with a friend named Liz Pace. The evening concluded with their return home around 4 a.m. Following her return, Kimberly went to the parking lot for reasons that remain unclear. Both her apartment and garage were thoroughly searched, but no signs of struggle or foreign fingerprints were found. This lack of evidence suggested either a meticulous cleanup or that any potential intruder may have worn gloves. The most puzzling aspect was the disappearance of Kimberly and her car without any trace, except for a single earring that was found. An analysis of Kimberly's bank account revealed that her last transaction occurred the evening before she vanished, ruling out the possibility that she had run away from home. Based on the evidence, detectives hypothesized that Kimberly was likely kidnapped. The investigation expanded to include additional police officers. Due to the lack of concrete leads, law enforcement considered information from a psychic. Witness interviews began with Liz Pace and Joshua. They revealed 65 calls were made from Kimberly's landline on March 1st. Joshua explained he made these calls to locate Kimberly, who was like a little sister to him. Liz Pace's testimony helped determine Kimberly's clothing in a portrait was created, highlighting her distinctive tattoos, including a scorpion and infinity sign. Meanwhile, a search for the missing car was underway, with checks at scrap metal collection points and other locations where the vehicle might be found. Unfortunately, no positive results were obtained. A check of Kimberly's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police advised Kimberly to pay attention to any letters or phone calls he received, as they might be from Kimberly's kidnappers demanding a ransom. The Kimberly family remained in a state of uncertainty until March 4th. At approximately 2 a.m., emergency services responded to a reported fire at a large, abandoned house located at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Multiple fire crews battled the blaze until it was finally extinguished. Upon investigation, a charred body was discovered in the basement of the building. Further analysis by forensic experts revealed the deceased was a woman between 20 to 25 years old, with remnants of long, black hair still intact. There were also signs of tape and evidence that her legs had been bound, with her hands tied behind her back. The most disturbing aspect, however, was that she was alive at the time of the fire, as indicated by the presence of smoke in her lungs. Detectives initially suspected that the body might belong to Kimberly, a missing person. To confirm the identity, dental records were required. Meanwhile, an inspection of the ashes and the air revealed the scent of gasoline, strongly suggesting that the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence of a serious crime. Despite the absence of other evidence, the charred body remained, and upon closer examination, specialists found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records from the dental clinic supported the investigation's suspicions, leading to the discovery of Kimberly Antonakis's body. As more details emerged, an eyewitness came forward who often walked his dog in the area. The dog had been acting strangely in the days prior to the fire, appearing nervous and barking at the house for no apparent reason. It wasn't until after the fire and the discovery of the body that the cause of the dog's behavior became clear. She had attempted to escape and called for help, but her cries went unheard by humans. However, the dog's acute hearing allowed it to detect the sounds coming from the basement, explaining its unusual behavior. When questioned by officers, the homeowner revealed that he had visited the building multiple times in recent days. He was trying to sell the house and would regularly check on its condition, collect mail, and pick up receipts. However, he only inspected the house from the outside and never went into the basement. The homeowner claimed he never heard any suspicious noises, and if he had, he would have investigated. Investigators decided to re-question Joshua, as they had some reservations about him. They also found it strangely coincidental that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua mentioned a person he hadn't been able to contact the day Kimberly went missing, a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had previously dated Kimberly. The detectives looked into this new information and discovered that the Russian had moved to the US with his parents at a young age. As he grew older, he became involved with a gang and had a history of breaking the law. This led to the identification of the first suspect, who was soon taken into custody. During interrogation, Psycho was informed of his former lover's death, but his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man not only denied involvement in the crime, but he also showed genuine emotional distress. Investigators took him to the crime scene to observe his behavior, and it became clear to everyone that they had the wrong person in custody. Later, his alibi was confirmed, leaving the investigation at a standstill once again. The victim's family sought the psychic's help again. This time, she claimed to have seen 4 people involved in the crime. According to her, the kidnappers had initially intended to establish communication but failed. The kidnapping didn't seem to have been planned with a tragic outcome. The psychic concluded that new information would emerge soon. A couple of days later, Mr. Kimberly, hoping to gather some leads, announced a $10,000 reward for information that could help catch the perpetrator. Mr. Kimberly couldn't shake off the psychic's words. He pondered the psychic's statement about the kidnappers wanting to make contact. What could that mean, and what had prevented them from doing so? Upon returning home, he sat at the table and stared at his phone for a while. He suddenly recalled a minor detail from the day Kimberly went missing. He had listened to all the answering machine recordings as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there were no messages, except for 2 blank ones with complete silence. He initially thought it was a technical issue or a problem with the connection. But it later became clear that this was not the case. 5 days after her body was found, the police located her car in a quiet area of town, not far from where her body was discovered. The investigators were hoping to find fingerprints in the car, but it had been thoroughly cleaned. The only evidence they found was her hair and a second earring in the passenger compartment. Although it seemed like a breakthrough, it didn't lead anywhere. Kimberly, her father, was linked to a local mob hit due to his wealth and success. However, detectives found no evidence to support the rumors. Kimberly, grieving the loss of his daughter, denied any involvement and was found to conduct his business openly and honestly. In July 1995, a burglary suspect was arrested at a New York City residence. Surprisingly, he shared information about the Kimberly case. The suspect claimed an acquaintance told him that his friends had kidnapped and killed she by burning her. Upon hearing the unidentified man's name, the officers pieced together the crime. The man in question was Joshua Torres, Kimberly's roommate who had participated in the search for her. Detectives took a closer look at the young man, calling him in for further questioning. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, a lengthy conversation revealed a potentially incriminating statement. He mentioned that if he were the kidnapper, he would have fed the victim Kimberly. This statement raised suspicions since there had been no public mention of the victim's hunger, thirst, or cold, and not even her father was aware of these details. To strengthen their case, investigators examined the suspect's past, finding a criminal record and a pattern of obsessive behavior. He was jobless and financially dependent on his roommate, caring for her child, which gave him unmonitored time to plan the crime. Knowing Kimberly's daily routine allowed him to abduct her and hide her in a vacant house. It was unclear why no ransom demands were made. Analyzing the suspect's calls revealed he lied about contacting Kimberly's acquaintances. The dialed numbers belonged to random individuals with no connection to Kimberly. Suspicious messages on his pager further implicated the suspect, Joshua. He had long been a suspect in the eyes of detectives, and they finally gathered enough evidence to arrest him. During the interrogation, they informed him that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend was no longer considered a suspect. Pressed for more information, Torres revealed that he suspected his friends of being responsible for her murder. Torres claimed that he thought his friends only intended to kidnap Kimberly for ransom and then release her unharmed. He admitted to being an accessory to the kidnapping but maintained that he did not think his friends would resort to violence. According to Torres, the plan was to demand a ransom and then let Kimberly go, but things did not go as planned. The kidnappers became frustrated when their ransom demands were met with silence from Mr. Kimberly. Unbeknownst to them, their calls had been answered by Kimberly's father, and a ransom message had even been recorded. However, due to a technical issue, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers, feeling ignored and angered by the lack of response, decided to wait and see how events would unfold. It turns out the group feared public attention, and the psychics claim that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was published and broadcast on TV, creating a cycle of events. Joshua was released on bail after speaking with the police, but then disappeared. Around the same time, Jose was shot while walking with his wife. Jose's wife later told investigators that her husband didn't trust Joshua and had been gathering evidence against him. She claimed Jose felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly but not about the house fire. He wanted to confess to the police, just as he had to her. The pager messages and suspect statements helped investigators piece together the kidnapping and crime details. 4 men were involved: Joshua, Julio Negrin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, also known as Jay. Notably, Julio had previously dated Kimberly and proposed, but she rejected him. The group was united by friendship and a shared criminal past. However, their actions were far surpassed by the horrific treatment of she at the hands of the guys. Nicholas had recently been released on bail, thanks to his mother's intervention, and had received a lenient fine for a crime that could have resulted in a prison sentence of over a year. Joshua had a history of serious offenses, including child abduction, violence against a minor, and illegal possession of weapons, despite his young age. Nevertheless, he too had received an inappropriately light sentence for his crimes. It was evident that Joshua was the ringleader, responsible for coordinating the group's actions. After Kimberly left the party, the men seized her in the parking lot, having apparently been stalking her and waiting for the ideal moment to strike when she was alone. A gun was used to intimidate Kimberly. When she resisted, the perpetrators tied her hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. They then put her in the trunk of a car and drove her to an abandoned house, where she was taken to the basement and tied to a chair. To prevent her from making noise, they removed her shoes. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed them money and that she would be released once he paid the debt. Julio was tasked with caring for Kimberly, bringing her food and water twice a day, and keeping her warm. However, fearing the consequences, Julio abandoned the house, leaving Kimberly without food, water, or warmth for 3 days. Once Julio left, the kidnappers informed Joshua, who made an audio recording demanding a ransom of $775,000. Then, the kidnapper called Kimberly's father, leaving 2 empty messages. The kidnappers waited for a response, genuinely confused as to why Kimberly's father didn't contact them. Meanwhile, Kimberly, left unattended, suffered from dehydration, passing out multiple times, yet continued to fight for her life. The kidnappers grew angry and fearful of being caught due to the lack of ransom payment, so they decided to release Kimberly. Upon entering the basement, they found her unconscious and assumed she was dead. To eliminate evidence in the hostage, they planned to get rid of her. During the investigation, officers learned from Liz Pace that Joshua used his roommate as an alibi, directing his accomplices while staying at home with his child. Liz Pace initially claimed she was unaware of Joshua's involvement in Kimberly's kidnapping. However, at the trial, she testified against him. She stated that after being interrogated, Joshua approached her and confessed to all his crimes. However, he then turned violent, physically assaulting her, silencing her, and issuing death threats before fleeing. Some time later, Joshua was apprehended by law enforcement. In an effort to further the investigation, the authorities decided to bring the former friends together, informing them that Joshua had denied any involvement in the massacre. Upon learning of Joshua's denial, Julio chose to cooperate with the investigation, revealing crucial information. This cooperation played a pivotal role in securing Torres' conviction for Kimberly's murder. Ultimately, the trio faced charges of murder, arson, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. During the trial, evidence emerged that Joshua had made repeated attempts to deceive investigators and evade punishment. After deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury reached a verdict. Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence as the others. Julio Negrin was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. Tomas Kimberly, the victim's family member, was satisfied with the court's verdict and did not want the perpetrators to receive the death penalty. In his opinion, the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment. Nicholas Brett was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison and died of AIDS after serving 2 years. Julio Negrin was released after serving his 2-year sentence. Joshua will not be eligible for release until 2053 at the earliest. Tragically, sadly, Kimberly's father, Kimberly, passed away from cancer in 2005. His family believes that the stress and grief caused by his daughter's death contributed to his illness. The life of Kimberly Antonakis, a beautiful young girl, was cut short in a shocking and devastating manner. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of April Jones. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007. The idea for her name came from her birthday. Unfortunately, she was not born as fortunate as other children, as it was revealed that she had cerebral palsy, a condition that affected her mobility. One day, April had been playing outside with a friend for approximately 20 minutes, but she did not return home around 7 p.m. as expected. Her parents had last seen her riding a bicycle. They went out to look for her and found her 7-year-old friend, but April was not with her. The friend explained that April got into a car with a stranger. Her friend was able to describe the man who had abducted April. He was wearing a green jacket and had blue or green eyes, brown hair, and a beard. Significantly, the friend mentioned that April had entered the car on the driver's side. This suggested that the car had a left-hand steering wheel, which is typical in the UK. The police responded promptly, arriving at the scene 8 minutes after the emergency call. They interviewed anyone who might have information about April's disappearance, but the family could not recall any unusual events that day. Earlier, April had attended her swimming class and was allowed to play outside with her friends, which was a typical routine. The news of April's disappearance spread rapidly through the neighborhood, and many locals left their homes to assist in the search. While the community's efforts were well-intentioned, they made the police's job more challenging, as the officers had to go door to door to gather information, but many residents were out searching. By the evening of October 1st, the authorities had released additional details about April's disappearance, including what she was wearing: a school polo shirt and a purple coat. More than 100 people had gathered to support the police in their search efforts. Their expertise can be very useful in locating her. Not only local residents showed up, but also a large number of volunteers from England who crossed the border into Wales to offer their support. Several people from South Wales also travelled up to assist. The search would not be easy, as the area around the town was surrounded by mountains, waterfalls, gorges, dense forests, uneven ground, and thick woodlands for miles. Additionally, it was a chilly, overcast autumn evening, and it was raining heavily outside. To ensure the volunteers' safety, the police had to carefully organize their efforts. Several volunteer search teams were now covering an area of about 60 square kilometers around 3:30 in the morning, 8 hours after the first police contact. The volunteers had been diligently navigating the harsh Welsh countryside. Despite conducting searches throughout the night, there was still no trace of April as of October 2nd, 2012. The police in Wales have now issued a child rescue notice, a nationwide alert for police agencies in the UK, requesting that they ensure their officers have a description of April and the man who abducted her. This was the first time the entire nation had heard the child rescue alarm. The media was now putting tremendous pressure on the police, 14 hours after April had disappeared, to provide every piece of information they had. It also questioned the way the police handled the probe. After taking over the investigation, Detective Superintendent Andy John began providing the public and media with as many updates as he could. He also placed barricades and instructed his officers to stop any approaching vehicles. Posters with an image of April, who was missing, were displayed in the hope that it would jog someone's memory. People living nearby, as well as those residing farther away, had been providing the police with various reports, as is common in investigations of this nature. Numerous locals identified a man who did match April's kidnapper, Mark Bridger. In general, a man from the area named Bridger was a Land Rover driver. His eyes were blue, he had short facial hair, and above all, he drove a left-hand drive car. Several witnesses claimed to have seen Bridger or his car in the vicinity when April vanished. They found Bridger's last known address and repeatedly tried to contact it, but neither he nor April Jones were there. Bridger had no prior history of legal troubles. Given the large number of volunteers involved in the search, it was impossible to verify the claims made by some residents that Bridger had participated in the initial search for April's disappearance at night. With the limited information available to them, and reports from the surrounding community about Bridger's apparent disappearance, the police focused all of their efforts on finding him. Helicopters hovered above the scene, and the police conducted a thorough search of all possible locations for him. They learned that Bridger had just moved into a brand new cottage named Mount Pleasant. Upon their arrival, there were no visible signs of life, and the property was devoid of any automobiles. They went into the cottage and called April's name, but she didn't answer. It was unclear at the moment if Bridger had been hiding from the authorities. A police helicopter had earlier seen him walking his dog near April's home, having apparently tried to disguise himself by shaving his head and beard. Police cornered and questioned him. The policeman questioned, "Where is she?" Bridger just answered, "It was an accident. I crushed her with my car. I don't know where she is." Officers reported that Bridger was very emotional throughout the arrest. The arresting officers read him his rights, which included the following: "You do not have to say anything, but anything you say may be used as evidence." Oddly enough, Bridger was eager to converse, though he was not required to speak. The officers reiterated that he was free to do so. He informed them, "I've been looking for her all day and night on foot. My car is in the garage. It is a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery. I didn't abduct her. I tried my best to revive her, then panicked. I only knew her name this morning when I saw the news on the television. I just wish I could remember where I'd put her. There was no life in her. She was just on the seat. I want to say sorry to the family." They took Bridger to the closest police station. In the meantime, back in April's hometown, police units, search teams, volunteers, and mountain rescuers kept searching every square inch of the Welsh countryside for April. Still, despite everyone's best efforts, they were unable to locate her. Along with the emergency services staff who worked just as hard and determinedly, hundreds of volunteers from across the nation stayed out all night, slept for a few hours, and then resumed their search. The police had received over 600 texts from people volunteering their services and proposing locations to search. Because of this, the police had a large number of volunteers to assist them in their search. And because of their local expertise, they were able to check over 20 distinct areas extensively. The people can occasionally obstruct this kind of investigation. Still, local expertise is essential in remote places like this one, and the police needed all the assistance they could get. At this point, Detectives had taken Mark Bridger into custody and were questioning him. Unusually for a man of his standing, he spoke without hesitation. On the contrary, he talked candidly about what had transpired. Right away, he said, "I don't know where she is. Yesterday, I came down to see my daughter's teacher. She had, parents' evening, and I then parked up opposite my girlfriend's house, which I believe is not far away from April's mother and father's house. Stupid. I'd had a few to drink, and there were two girls on their bikes. I remember the dark-headed girl came behind the car. I looked to see where the other girl was, and I couldn't see this other little girl. And the next minute, the bike was there." Bridger acknowledged that he was in the vicinity at the time and acknowledged hitting April with his automobile while intoxicated when she was riding her bike. Mark Bridger insists that he never intended to harm April, even though he acknowledges that he was aware of his error. Instead, he maintains that he took off with her in his car. He needed to bring her to the hospital right away, and that's what he realized. "It's okay, Mark. The color had gone out of her. Okay, her lips were purple. Paul and Call are friends of mine, and I've killed their daughter." Effective then, without hesitation, Bridger acknowledges that his actions that evening caused April Jones to die. He even goes so far as to say that her parents were friends. However, Bridger's memory tends to deteriorate following the submission. He has been relatively open about his involvement thus far. Actually, these officers may have never had an easier time getting a confession from someone. Bridger can't recall anything about what he did with April's body, though. Following her confession, despite the police's repeated attempts to question him, Bridger's unexpected episode of amnesia persisted. "And I'm in my house, and she's not there. Being upstairs, and I can't find her. I wouldn't have ditched her. I know that I wouldn't have. I'd have put her somewhere." With Mark Bridger, the cops have been quite cautious thus far. He'd been entirely honest with them. They can make him clam up with aggressive interrogation, but now they start to question his sincerity. The police were aware that there was very little likelihood that Bridger's memory would be blank at the critical moment when April's body vanished. The pressure increased as the cops questioned him. Even though it is evident that he was lying, he persisted in telling his story and got even more upset. In fact, the cops started to wonder if April was dead at all. Was there anything that Mark Bridger was saying that they could genuinely believe? The police decided to give Bridger a platform to give us account of what happened on Tuesday. The day he was hauled in, however, the police used it as an opportunity to get more information out of him. "You tell me that when you get out of your vehicle, you look underneath the vehicle and you see April." Yes, although Bridger insisted that he had run over April, the police received evidence from April's 7-year-old companion that April was okay and had cheerfully gotten into Bridger's car and was grinning. Who would lie like that to a 7-year-old? In actuality, they would not have any cause to, nor would they choose to. We have a witness that was present. This person says that April got into the Land Rover via the driver's door, which on a normal car would be the right-hand side, but that's really the passenger side door on your car. That is a complete fabrication and lies. It can't have happened. Bridger shifted his tone. It was apparent he was unaware that the police had a witness, albeit a 7-year-old one, who saw it all. It was clear that the information contradicted his account of events, and he was upset. Regardless of his emotional condition, Bridger remained resilient to the various methods of inquiry, and his version of events held steady. He showed no signs of backing down. The detectives did something. They brought in Dr. Joe Sullivan, one of the world's foremost authorities on criminal body language and conduct. Dr. Sullivan did more than just watch the Bridger interviews. He also went to his house. He wanted to know everything there was to know about this individual in order to create a psychological profile. What he found astounded him. Bridger kept knives, handcuffs, and a shotgun, both hidden and on display at his house. Moreover, he was employed at a slaughterhouse. According to Dr. Sullivan, Bridger was a fantasist who thought of himself as a character akin to Rambo. Stated differently, he was not part of the real world. In defiance of Dr. Sullivan's guidance, the police chose to approach their inquiry in a paternalistic manner. After all, Bridger was a father of 6. Bridger was not going to alter his claim now. Their only chance was with the forensic specialists thoroughly searching Bridger's house. The teams at the house did manage to devise a solution, though. They may have found anyone's blood. They found little specks of it in the restroom. It's possible that Bridger cut himself shaving. It was just that the police were ignorant at this time. After submitting the samples to the laboratory, it can take up to 24 hours to receive the findings. After the police took him in, disregarding his advice, Dr. Sullivan told the officers what he believed Bridger to be. He was unlikely to experience an enormous amount of empathy or have any major sense of guilt about what he had done. Of course, he will inevitably try to present himself as someone who does have those characteristics. But the sense that I had from the information we had gathered, even at that time, was that this is a man who is not going to respond to an appeal to his better nature. According to Dr. Sullivan, there was little need to attempt to appeal to Bridger's better nature. He didn't have one, and he wasn't going to respond to any police appeals for regret, sympathy, or guilt. Now that the police had taken Dr. Sullivan's advice to heart, Bridger was under increased strain on suspicion of murder. They detained him again right away. It was a shocking shock. Bridger turned completely pale. The police had also found explicit photos of children on his laptop. The reason for his second arrest was that he had offensive pictures of kids. The net was getting closer. Bridger now thought the police had more information than they had disclosed. April's parents were unconcerned, even though Bridger seemed to be losing control of the situation. 3 days after April had disappeared on that fateful Monday night, that the police had given up on locating April alive. It's not an abduction case anymore, it's a murder. Naturally, the police kept this knowledge from Bridger. Still, they also made the decision to advise the numerous volunteers who had put in a lot of effort to locate April that it was time for them to head home and leave the situation to the experts. This suggestion met with stiff resistance as hundreds of exhausted volunteers, many of whom were crying. As they departed the site, they had little to show for their efforts. On Friday, 4 days after April's disappearance, police search teams were out in full force, scouring the area for any clues. Forensic investigators found no proof that Bridger had killed April. Importantly, there was also no evidence supporting Bridger's account. Inspection of his vehicle, a Land Rover, revealed no marks, blood, hair, or skin, contradicting his claim that April's body should have left scratches or traces inside the car. Bridger tried to clarify by saying he did not witness any blood on April after the alleged collision. The child had apparently been run over, yet showed no visible injuries. But his narrative and the game he had been playing with the police was about to be exposed as a farce. On Friday night at 6:15 p.m., the lab contacted the detectives. They had matched April's toothbrush DNA to blood spatters found in Bridger's bathroom. They also discovered April's DNA on Bridger's fleece collar and jogging bottoms. After gathering sufficient evidence, the police filed charges against Bridger. They had found sexualized photos of minors on his laptop, which he denied viewing for personal satisfaction, despite his internet search history. Bridger had been in custody for 3.5 days by Saturday. As the allotted 96-hour questioning period neared its end, the Crown Prosecution Service had to decide whether to press charges. Just over an hour after the final interview, Bridger remained unfazed upon hearing the charges. There was no remorse or emotion from him. As the prison van arrived, angry bystanders hurled objects and insults at Bridger. Over the next 2 weeks, forensic investigators found increasing blood traces of April at Bridger's house, as well as several broken bones in his fireplace, though it could not be conclusively determined if they were April's due to decomposition. On May 30th, 2013, a jury found 47-year-old Mark Bridger guilty of April Jones' kidnapping and murder. The judge labeled him a chronic liar and pedophile, stating that April was likely not his intended target, but tragically happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Without hesitation, the judge sentenced Bridger to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Bridger maintained his claim that April's death was a horrific accident when his car struck her, but had long lost any credibility. April Jones was a typical young child, full of potential, whose life was tragically cut short by a single sick individual. Her family, while devastated, expressed relief that Bridger would never be free to harm another child. April's remains were never found in Bridger's house. Though 17 bone fragments were recovered, none conclusively linked to her. Her parents pushed for changes to how search engines handle illegal content, leading to new measures by companies like Google and Bing. April's family and friends will always have a void in their hearts that cannot be filled. Wish for them to be able to reconstruct their lives to the best of their abilities. On April 26, 2013, April's funeral service was held in her hometown. May April Jones rest in peace. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Cécile Bloch. 3.5 decades after the chilling and mysterious murder of 11-year-old French girl Cécile Bloch, the veil of secrecy was finally lifted by the revelation of DNA evidence. Unveiled alongside this newfound truth after the 35-year hunt was a horrifying connection. The same malevolent hand that took Cécile's innocence also stained France with the blood of other victims during the dark period from 1986 to 1994. To make it worse, the chilling revelation was that the very person responsible for these heinous acts was someone who was supposed to be a guardian of the law, a gendarme and a policeman at the time of the murders. This is the tragic tale of Cécile Bloch. It's the fateful morning of May 5th, 1986. The universe seemed to conspire against 24-year-old Luc Bloch, with the day kicking off on the wrong foot. At first, his alarm clock didn't go off, and to make matters worse, nobody in the Bloch household had the foresight to rouse him from his restless slumber. Luc, now in a mad dash to get to work, also had to make sure his young sister wasn't late to school. With a sense of urgency gnawing at his heels, he calls out to his little sister, telling her to hasten her preparations for school as he hurriedly leaves the apartment. In those days, it was common for children to go to school on their own. Every morning on weekdays, the parents Jean-Pierre and Suzanne Bloch would embark on their own journeys to work by 8 a.m. Luc, too, would depart the family apartment, leaving just before Cécile, who typically set off for her classes around 8:45 a.m. Lunchtime brought a cherished routine. Cécile would return home alone, savoring a comforting bowl of soup before serenading the household with her beloved violin. This gifted young girl was a maestro of melodies and really loved music. She harbored an affection for dogs and also excelled at school. At noon, her loving mother Suzanne would routinely dial the family apartment to make sure her daughter got home safely and had taken her lunch. But on that fateful day, an eerie silence met her call. The girl didn't pick up the phone, and this would lead to a horrific revelation that would create many questions of what had truly transpired on this fateful day. Let me take you back to the moment Luc Bloch embarked on his daily journey to work. As he stepped out of the apartment, the darkness of the landing greeted him yet again. There was no light for the third consecutive day. Frustration coursed through him as his fingers fumbled in the inky darkness to find the elevator button. The only functioning elevator glided to a halt on the 3rd floor, and inside stood a well-dressed young man. This man, possibly in his late 20s, possessed an athletic build with a pockmarked face. Luc, feeling a twinge of embarrassment, extended a cordial greeting, then disembarked on the 1st floor. The stranger wished him a strangely emphatic, "Good day." Something about this encounter struck Luc as peculiar. The man's politeness appeared excessive for a stranger. It was almost unnerving. In hindsight, Luc would recall the haunting final words uttered by this strange man. "Have a very, very good day." Little did he realize that in a matter of minutes, this very man would perpetrate the unspeakable to his young sister that would forever leave a scar in his heart. The clock struck 8:20 a.m., and within the building, the concierge perused a fresh newspaper while neighbors bustled about their morning routines. None among the building's residents could fathom that in just half an hour, young Cecile would meet her tragic fate, a fate that awaited her lifeless form in the shadowy depths of the building's basement, a staggering 3 floors beneath the building that was once her peaceful home. Suzanne, her heart sinking with each unanswered call, began to entertain a glimmer of hope that Cecile might be at her friend's house. She dialed the number, praying for a reassuring voice on the other end, but her fear intensified. As her friend confirmed the chilling truth, Cecile hadn't been to school, and she hadn't seen her that day either. By 1 p.m., panic had engulfed the parents, driving them to sprint back into the apartment, their frantic voices echoing as they desperately called out for their beloved daughter. Cecile was nowhere to be found. Suzanne's gaze fell upon her daughter's absent school bag, a sign that she had indeed departed. But to where? Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre initiated a series of agonizing calls to local hospitals, their anxious pleas met with the same heartbreaking reply. No girl matching Cecile's description had been admitted. In the building's lobby, the parents beseeched the concierge to aid in the search for their missing child. With urgency fueling their every step, they raced to the police station, scouring the nearby streets and playgrounds as they went. Cecile was known for her unwavering attendance at school, and there were no significant issues at home to explain her absence. The question loomed large. Why had she left, and where had she gone? The concierge, now joined by 2 concerned neighbors, embarked on a painstaking search of the building floor by floor, inching their way downwards, but the haunting truth remained. Cecile had vanished without a trace. All that remained was to descend into the foreboding cellar. The first room they entered was empty and devoid of any answers, while the second room stood locked. They then entered the third room, a chamber of forgotten clutter that obscured any immediate revelation. The room was a chaotic maze of forgotten possessions, a lot of junk from years past, so densely entangled that nothing could be seen at a single glance. In a breathless moment, a flashlight pierced the darkness, casting a feeble glow upon the basement's desolation. At first glance, it appeared vacant, but just as they were about to retreat, at the corner of his eye, one man caught a glimpse of something amiss in the periphery. A grimy, time-worn carpet that seemed to conceal something beneath it. He summoned the others, a glimmer of dread tugging at their hearts. Unfortunately, they found who they were looking for, but not the way they hoped they would find her. Outside the house, police cars and an ambulance had already arrived at the scene when Cecile's parents returned. They rushed past the gathered crowd in the basement. It was too late. The innocent life of young Cecile had already been taken, her innocence brutally shattered. The wheels of justice began to turn as a relentless investigation was launched into the heart-wrenching homicide. The grim investigation unveiled a chilling timeline. The malevolent intruder had infiltrated the block, lingering within its walls, and shared a sinister 40-minute encounter with Cecile, with witnesses testifying that he had departed the building at 9:20 a.m. They all echoed a hauntingly consistent description of the suspect. A dark-haired young man, aged between 25 and 30, his face marred by the cruel reminders of severe acne scars, the very same man who had exchanged strange pleasantries with Luke that morning. Drawing from the accounts of 6 witnesses and Luke's recollection, the police conjured a rough sketch of the malefactor, which found its way onto the pages of newspapers across France. While investigators managed to secure the assailant's biological material and ascertain his blood type, the nascent era of DNA forensics limited their progress. The evidence, a tantalizing puzzle piece, remained locked in a cold, waiting silence as the promise of breakthroughs in forensic science beckoned from the shadows. Yet the revelations remained scant, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a community haunted by uncertainty. Just a month prior, the city had shuddered at the news of a similar predator haunting their midst. A man bearing an uncanny resemblance to the male factor now under investigation had assaulted an 8-year-old girl in an elevator, yet miraculously, she had survived to share her harrowing tale with investigators. This brave child, known only as Sarah, recounted how the man had cunningly posed as a police officer during the ordeal. What sent shock waves through the community were the eerie parallels emerging in 3 additional sexual assault cases. In these grim chapters, the assailant, employing the same sinister ruse, had targeted a 26-year-old woman and 2 young girls, aged 11 and 14. Each victim had fallen prey to his apparent police identification card and the menacing glint of handcuffs, tools of restraint that he employed with chilling precision. The authorities were gripped by a sense of urgency as they grappled with the unsettling question: was this a deceitful ploy to gain the trust of unsuspecting victims, or was he actually a police officer? Their suspicions were stoked not only by the violence inflicted upon his victims, but also by the chillingly calculated tactics he employed. A nagging intuition lingered among investigators, a conviction that this male factor was no ordinary criminal. Their gut told them he was either a sworn officer or a gendarme, a belief that would later be chillingly confirmed. However, capturing this predator was far from straightforward, as he continued to elude the clutches of justice with diabolical cunning. Despite widespread distribution of the sketch to the local population, it proved futile in unmasking the perpetrator. By the close of 1987, a sinister shadow had been cast over a number of crimes, all attributed to this man, based on his distinctive appearance and chilling demeanor. The investigation remained in an agonizing deadlock for years, swinging back and forth between closed and reopened status. In a cruel twist of fate, the latest DNA tests conducted in a bid for justice yielded inconclusive results, shrouding the identity of the perpetrator in a veil of impenetrable darkness. Tragically, the parents of the young victim never lived to witness the moment of reckoning. Suzanne met her untimely end in a devastating traffic accident in 1989, while Jean-Pierre departed the world in 2011. Their hearts bore the heavy burden of never knowing the face of the monster who had stolen their beloved Cecile away forever, leaving a haunting legacy of unresolved pain and injustice. The embers of the unresolved mystery began to rekindle, lighting the way for the determined cold case detectives. They uncovered a piece of evidence that sparked a glimmer of hope. The killer, known to drive a white car, had once been a member of the prestigious gendarmerie. His chilling history culminated in a final crime committed near a gendarmerie training center. The techniques he used displayed the unmistakable signs of police and military training. In 2021, the police made a bold move. They called in around 750 former police officers who had worked in the Paris area during the time of the crimes. Among them was the very man who had evaded justice for so long, who was called in for questioning on September 29, 2021. The investigators' goal was clear: to collect the DNA of these suspects, hoping fervently that the murderer might finally be identified among them. The plot took a harrowing twist on September 24th, when a summons landed in the hands of a man, compelling his appearance for questioning on September 29th. The demand extended further, requiring the surrender of a DNA sample. However, in a startling turn of events, the narrative pivoted on September 27th when the man's wife reported him missing. As the clock ticked relentlessly towards the fateful date, the puzzle was far from complete. 2 days later, on September 29, 2021, in a quiet town in the south of France, tragedy struck in the form of a suicide. François Verove, a 59-year-old man, chose to end his own life, leaving behind a farewell note that laid bare a haunting confession. Among its chilling lines, it read, "I admit being a great criminal who committed unforgivable acts until the end of the 1990s." In a heart-wrenching conclusion, DNA tests revealed the somber truth. The man authorities had hunted relentlessly for years, the pockmarked man, the elusive predator, was unmasked as François Verove. However, much about his background remained shrouded in mystery. Born on January 22, 1962 in France, he had grown up under the stern gaze of a strict father, a stepmother, and two stepsisters. His biological mother had succumbed to the ruthless grip of the flu. In his youth, he had harbored an unsettling fascination with horror movies, perhaps offering a glimpse into the darkness that would later consume him. In 1983, Francois embarked on a new chapter as he moved to Paris and joined the National Gendarmerie. By June 1985, he had married and took it upon himself to construct a family home from the ground up, a testament to his ambitions. In the eyes of a former friend, he wore the dual masks of kindness and decency, but his temper lurked just beneath the surface, a volatile element that could erupt without warning. Behind this facade, however, lay a chilling truth. He was completely the opposite of the positive traits he may have portrayed to others. 4 innocent young girls had suffered beneath his sinister hand, miraculously escaping his clutches, all except for young Cécile Bloch. Francois's malevolence didn't stop there. In 1987, he cold-bloodedly murdered 2 adults, 38-year-old Gilles Politi and his devoted housekeeper, Irmgard Muller. Armed with crucial DNA evidence, investigators embarked on a gripping journey, determined to unravel the secrets of a malefactor whose dark deeds seemed endless. They fervently believed his sinister trail of crimes extended far beyond those already uncovered, driving them to delve deeper into unsolved cases, searching for hidden connections that could reveal the full extent of his reign of terror. Unfortunately, earthly justice may never hold him accountable for his atrocities, and retribution seems out of reach. The specter of his deeds looms large, leaving the question of inevitable justice to the realm beyond. As this harrowing tale unfolds, we are left with unanswered questions, wounds that may never fully heal, and the haunting presence of a man who committed unspeakable acts. Francois Vérot may have evaded earthly justice, but his actions are forever etched in the indelible ink of infamy. Amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope stands, as a testament to the relentless tenacity of those who pursued answers. With advancements in DNA technology, the truth emerged from the depths of despair. In the afterlife, in the realm beyond, justice may yet find its elusive mark, allowing the innocent souls scarred by his malevolence to finally rest in peace. In the shadow of these chilling revelations, let us remember all those who suffered at the hands of this predator. Their memory lives on as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of our world, the relentless pursuit of justice can be a beacon of hope. As we close this chapter of human frailty and malevolence, let us remember Cécile, not for the darkness that took her, but for the vibrant spirit she once embodied. For every life taken too soon, there remains a legacy that defies the shadows, a testament to the unwavering hope that someday justice will prevail. May the souls of Cécile and all the other victims rest in eternal peace. The case of Mohammed Shamji, a brilliant surgeon, father of many, and ruthless criminal victims of domestic violence sometimes not only endure abuse, humiliation, and beatings, but also blame themselves for what's happening. Each of these cases, when brought to the public's attention, is condemned, causing confusion and leading to many questions. Why does the victim allow themselves to be treated this way? Why don't they tell anyone? Why don't they leave their abuser? Contrary to popular belief that physical violence occurs primarily in dysfunctional families, statistics show that such incidents don't depend on the social status of spouses, their position in society, or their job titles. Mohammed Shamji and Ilana Frick Shamji were not only outstanding doctors, but also true luminaries of science. Mohammed made a name for himself in neurosurgery and the treatment of spine injuries and diseases, while his wife was an equally renowned family doctor with a PhD. For years, they both saved other people's lives, yet few knew what was happening in their private lives. This story shocked the entire world, and the accused admitted his guilt only to spare his 12-year-old daughter, who had accidentally witnessed her mother's death, from having to testify in court. Notably, shortly before the tragedy, Ilana had posted a photo of her husband in a kimono on social media, taken during one of his jiu-jitsu training sessions, with a joking comment that this doctor could not only heal, but also break a neck. This post turned out to be prophetic. Ilana Frick. Life before meeting Mohammed. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in the Canadian city of Windsor, located in Ontario in the southern part of the country. She was the younger of two daughters in the family of George and Anna Frick, who emigrated from Croatia to North America in the early 1970s. Elena was raised alongside her older sister Caroline, with whom she was very close from an early age. The birth of Ilana was seen as a miracle by her parents, as Anna had serious complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had said she would never conceive again. Ilana's parents worked at a large car factory, striving to provide their daughters with everything they needed and to give them a good education. Both sisters were smart and did well in school, but Ilana stood out for her determination and passion for learning. She spent nearly all her free time reading books, and she also managed to attend a dance studio, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field. During middle school, Ilana chose to work during summer breaks to help her family. She worked in cornfields, and even then tried to manage her budget wisely. Elena excelled in math and other sciences, and by high school, she had decided to pursue a career in medicine and become a doctor. She graduated from high school as the top student and enrolled in a prestigious medical university without issue. Around this time, she also began a romantic relationship with a man named Matthew Ryan, whom she had known since high school and who was now studying in the same department. Their student romance lasted until graduation, but afterward, Frick decided to go to Ottawa and continue her studies in the capital's university residency program. Her boyfriend settled for a job at a local hospital and didn't consider furthering his studies. Elena's and Matthew's relationship continued long distance and lasted until nearly 2002. They even planned to marry, but eventually decided to remain friends. By then, Elena was interning at one of the country's top clinics and aimed to earn a doctorate, while Matthew hadn't advanced in his career. Love at first sight. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Ilana went to the staff room and saw a new colleague who immediately caught her attention. The young man, Mohammed Shamji, was just a year older than Ilana and was doing his residency in the neurosurgery department. Mohammed came from a family of prominent doctors. He was born and raised in Ottawa in a family of the renowned surgeon Farid Shamji and his talented psychiatrist wife, Edith. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, was an experienced medical biophysicist. Both brothers graduated from Yale University, and Mohammed later returned to Canada to earn his doctorate from Western Ontario's Research University. Mohammed was also interested in the blonde, but initially, he made no effort to approach her. Ilana, however, fell for this tall, dark-skinned man at first sight and tried to attract his attention. Soon, Mohammed asked his colleagues for her number and sent her a message, and their relationship began to blossom. Ilana considered Mohammed a shy and modest man. He rarely took the initiative, felt uncomfortable on dates, jumped from topic to topic, or fell silent, appearing detached and introverted. Later, it turned out, these oddities weren't due to shyness, but rather a lack of interest. Mohammed was already seeing another woman, but for some reason, he kept this from his infatuated colleague. When Frick discovered the existence of a rival, she resolved to win over Mohammed and become his one and only. Their relationship was rocky during the first year, with the couple breaking up 3 times before rekindling, mainly due to Ilana's persistence. Her parents were aware of this and urged her to leave Mohammed, but she stood firm, believing she had found her one true love. Ilana often pampered her lover with gifts, made surprises, and brought him home-cooked meals. Mohammed seemed to just let himself be loved, readily accepting everything but reciprocating only occasionally. This one-sided game appeared to create an emotional dependence on Mohammed for Ilana. Unplanned pregnancy, wedding, and the beginning of a nightmare. In the summer of 2004, Frick informed her partner that they were going to have a child. This news came as a surprise to both of them, causing more anxiety than joy. Nonetheless, Muhammad, raised in a strict conservative Muslim country, felt compelled to follow tradition and marry the mother of his child before its birth. In early September that year, the couple had a wedding with 2 ceremonies. The first adhered to all cultural customs respected by the groom's family, and the second took place among the couple's friends at one of the trendiest restaurant complexes. The newlyweds seemed happy and in love, but no one could have imagined that their marriage would be the start of a nightmare that would end in tragedy. The couple moved into a spacious house in one of Ottawa's prestigious neighborhoods. In January 2005, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Yasmina. Unfortunately, the birth of their daughter didn't strengthen their marriage. The young father was entirely focused on his career and planned to continue his education, with his wife and newborn daughter taking a back seat. Moreover, Muhammad didn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. After the birth of her child, Ilana went on maternity leave, focusing on household chores and caring for her daughter. This irritated her husband, who, after returning from work, would retreat to his home office, spending little time with his wife and child. Over time, he became increasingly nervous and irritable, criticizing his wife's appearance, refusing to eat what she cooked, and calling her stupid and useless. Ilana tried not to complain about her family issues, not even to close friends or parents. However, one day, while talking to her mother on the phone, Muhammad, returning home in a bad mood, began berating and insulting his wife, which her mother overheard. She tried to defend her daughter, but her son-in-law blamed Ilana for their crumbling marriage. Anna tried to convince her daughter to file for divorce and leave the man treating her this way, but Ilana flatly refused, saying she loved her husband and would handle everything. She kept quiet about Muhammad's physical abuse, simply because the verbal abuse no longer seemed enough for him. In the summer of 2005, the situation spiraled out of control when Muhammad, in a fit of rage, punched Ilana in the face, breaking her nose. Ilana, with her baby in hand, fled to friends and filed a police report for domestic violence. She also decided to get a divorce and leave the man she had married for good. Unexpectedly, Muhammad began begging his wife to return, promising never to hit her again or even raise his voice. He swore he would change and that their family life would be everything Ilana had ever dreamed of, and he would control his emotions. Shamji seemed sincerely remorseful, but this behavior was driven by certain circumstances. The young neurosurgeon was preparing to enroll at Duke University, aiming to earn his doctorate, and a criminal conviction could end his promising medical career. Muhammad cared only for himself and his future, but he succeeded in convincing Ilana to drop the charges and not file for divorce. She even agreed to follow him to the United States, to North Carolina, where he was to continue his studies and earn a degree. A period of relative calm. Friends and family were baffled by why Ilana didn't leave her tyrant husband and withdrew her police report. When she announced her intention to move to another country with Muhammad, they tried to dissuade her, but Ilana stood firm. Frick was smart, educated, driven, and ambitious, financially independent, and capable of achieving any career goal, but her destructive relationship and emotional dependence on her husband were stronger. She was ready to abandon everything and sacrifice all for a marriage that didn't bring her happiness, only suffering. However, after moving to the United States, a period of relative calm came to their family. Muhammad was admitted to an elite biomedical engineering program, difficult to enter due to the intense competition. Meanwhile, Ilana enrolled in a master's program at the School of Policy and Health at Duke University, receiving a scholarship covering her tuition. The couple seemed to reconnect, spending more time together. Their relationship became stable enough that they decided to have a second child. In August 2007, they welcomed their younger daughter, Faiza. However, Muhammad again couldn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. What does the happy family keep secret? In late summer 2009, the couple and their children returned to Canada, settling back into their home in Ottawa. This time, Ilama decided not to stay on maternity leave for long, and she quickly secured a position at a prestigious hospital as a family doctor, earning a solid reputation. Meanwhile, her husband balanced work, studies, and teaching at the university. In the late 2000s, social media was gaining popularity worldwide, and the couple started a personal blog, showcasing a seemingly ideal family in every sense. They posted photos of their travels, spoke about achievements in science, flaunted their luxurious lifestyle in a lavish home, attended prestigious conferences and trendy resorts, and spent time with friends at expensive restaurants. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in-love couple with no problems. But their followers couldn't fathom what was hidden behind this facade. In reality, Muhammad again distanced himself from his wife, continuing to exert strict control over her. He carefully monitored who she interacted with, what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods. But Ilama preferred to remain silent about it. The tension and aggression from Shamji grew, with him yelling at his wife and blaming her for all their arguments and discord. In 2011, the talented neurosurgeon was offered a fellowship in spinal surgery at one of the largest medical centers in Calgary. He accepted the offer, but this time he went alone, leaving his family in Ottawa since Ilama couldn't leave her job. For over a year, they maintained a long-distance relationship, but during one visit home, Muhammad left his laptop on, and Ilama saw a message from a woman on his social media. The content suggested they were romantically involved. When Ilana directly confronted Muhammad, he didn't deny it, admitting to having an affair. This was another painful blow for Frick, and she again considered divorcing her rude, unfaithful husband. Her family was sure she wouldn't forgive him this time. Surprisingly, Ilana gave their family another last chance. Muhammad promised to end his affair and said they would start fresh in Toronto, where he had been offered a prestigious, well-paying job. Domestic violence and revenge affair. Shortly after moving, Muhammad expressed his continued desire for a son, suggesting they try again. Ilama agreed, thinking that having a third child might help solidify their family. In October 2013, they welcomed a long-awaited boy named Marius. The father was happy, but his attitude toward his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, Shamji focused entirely on his medical career, becoming an accredited neurosurgeon with a reputation for handling the toughest and most hopeless cases that other doctors avoided. Frick also advanced, becoming a delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. However, tension between the couple began to rise again. Muhammad didn't stop at rudeness and insults, but resumed hitting the mother of his children. During a family ski vacation, Ilama had a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, along with other injuries, but she claimed she hurt herself skiing. After returning home, Ilana confided in her best friend that all the injuries were inflicted by her husband following another argument over a newly discovered affair he had with a colleague. Ilana had overheard part of a phone conversation between Muhammad and his mistress, and when she asked him about it, he beat her. Her friend again suggested she divorce him, and when Ilana refused, joked that she should get a revenge affair. The women laughed, but the hurt wife might have thought it was a good way to get back at her cheating husband. The summer of 2016 was challenging. While the older kids were at camp and the youngest stayed with maternal grandparents, the couple's relationship completely fell apart. In early September, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, sharing the news on social media. But a week later, they spoke of divorce. Muhammad refused, stating he was content, while a desperate Ilama had an affair with a colleague who had shown interest in her. She immersed herself in this new relationship, basking in the care and attention of another man, enjoying the long-forgotten feeling of being loved and desired. Did she run away with her lover, leaving her kids behind? On November 25, 2016, a heated argument broke out in the family when Elena told her husband that divorce was inevitable. The next day, she met with a divorce lawyer and then left for a 3-day medical conference in another city. During this time, Mohammed sent her messages, pleading with her to reconsider and save the marriage, at least for the children. On November 30th, Ilana returned home and made her final phone call to her parents. Her voice revealed some anxiety, but she assured them everything was fine. Later, it was discovered that she had tried calling the police that evening, but in her panic, misdialed one digit, leading to a tragic outcome. On December 1st, Anna couldn't reach her daughter, so she called her son-in-law to find out what had happened. Mohammed calmly told her that his wife had packed her bags in the middle of the night and fled to her lover, abandoning him and the children. Her parents didn't believe him, knowing their daughter would never leave her daughters and young son like that. They contacted a close friend of Alana's who lived nearby, asking her to discreetly watch the Shamji home while they took the first flight to Toronto and reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. Alana's friend reported that her car was still in the driveway, which only heightened the family's concern. Upon arriving at their daughter's house, they found nothing immediately suspicious. But Mohammed was agitated, saying they had called the police unnecessarily and insisting that Alana was with her lover. He had already told the police this version when they visited earlier, following the report of Mrs. Frikshamji's disappearance. Body in a suitcase. In the early morning hours of December 2nd, a man walking his dog along the river, about 24 miles from Shamji's home, saw a large suitcase at the base of the bridge. He was initially going to pass it by, but curiosity got the better of him, especially since the suitcase looked almost new. When he opened it, he was horrified to find the lifeless body of a blonde woman inside. He immediately notified the police, and the suitcase and body were sent to the medical examiner's office for identification and to determine the cause and circumstances of death. There were no issues with identification, as the criminal hadn't even bothered to remove the luggage tag from the suitcase from Alana's recent trip to a conference. Her parents confirmed her identity. The body had multiple abrasions and bruises, but the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. The woman was dressed in pajamas and had no shoes, and based on the position of her body, she had been placed in the suitcase immediately after her death. The young witness Mohammed was arrested that evening at a coffee shop where he was meeting with a lawyer. It was evident he was planning to leave the country, but he didn't have the chance. He was charged with first-degree murder, but the neurosurgeon denied any involvement. However, a horrific detail of the incident emerged. It turned out that the couple's eldest daughter, 12-year-old Yasmina, had accidentally witnessed her mother's assassination. According to the girl, she heard screams and noise coming from her parents' room and ran there. She cracked open the door and saw her father kneeling behind the bed. Her mother was likely lying on the floor, but Yasmina couldn't see her from the doorway. Mohammed yelled at his daughter, ordering her to leave immediately, shut the door behind her, and go to bed. In the morning, he told the girls that their mother had left. Yasmina, despite her age, understood something terrible had happened, but couldn't imagine that her father had taken their mother's life. A confession, trial, and sentence. To spare his daughter from having to testify in court, the accused confessed and recounted what happened that dreadful evening. According to him, he and his wife argued about her infidelity and desire for a divorce. Mohammed claimed he didn't mean to harm Alana, but things escalated spontaneously. The argument turned physical, and she tried to call the police, but he knocked the phone from her hand. She began screaming, and Mohammed struck her multiple times in the face, then pinned her to the floor and strangled her with his hands. At this moment, their daughter walked in but couldn't see what was happening due to the bed. When Mohammed realized his wife wasn't breathing, he attempted to resuscitate her, but it was in vain, as in his rage, he had broken her neck. He then put her body in a large suitcase, loaded it into the trunk of his car, and drove around aimlessly for hours, unsure of what to do next. Upon reaching a small bridge over a river, he decided to throw the suitcase down, hoping the current would carry it away, making it impossible to find. However, in the darkness, he didn't see that the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation. In fall 2017, while the trial of the criminal surgeon was underway, a new scandal erupted involving his father, Farid Shamji, who made disparaging remarks about his deceased daughter-in-law. He attempted to justify his son's actions, saying his wife had been unfaithful and provoked him. These comments led to an investigation into the elderly man, and his medical license was revoked. In April 2019, Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, though with the possibility of parole in 14 years. Given the time served during the trial, he may be released as early as 2030. Moreover, Muhammad was forbidden from contacting his children or Alama's parents and ordered to pay them a large sum as compensation. He was also permanently stripped of his medical license, Not uncommon, but this one was louder than the usual ones. Concerned, one neighbor ventured to check on them, only to encounter an eerie silence, just as they neared to knock on the apartment door. No one was arguing anymore. It was dead silent. This strange silence prompted unease, but the neighbor, confused about what to do next, just retreated to their apartment. The police meticulously pieced together Tishko's movements, extending their investigation to his workplace and the company vehicle he used, requesting forensic testing on it. The GPS in the car revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th, indicating visits to clients interspersed with returns to his own residence throughout his usual work hours during those days. On the day of the heated argument, Tishko's phone revealed that he left his apartment around 6:30 p.m. as dusk settled. Witnesses spotted him striding along the freeway, a solitary figure shrouded in all-black attire. A passing motorcyclist described him as visibly distant, lost in his thoughts. Law enforcement intercepted Tishko and escorted him. Upon questioning, Tishko explained that his intention was to catch a train, but he changed his mind and decided to take a contemplative walk home instead. However, an official report was never filed, leaving a gap in the recorded events on November 19, 2019. The unfolding events led to Tishko's arrest. He had visible scratches on his forearms, and a search of his apartment uncovered unsettling clues. Wilma's belongings, including her bag and coat, were hanging in their usual places. Further discoveries awaited investigators that Tuesday night, as her shoes and eyeglasses were also found. Linda emphasized her daughter's attachment to her bag. The examination revealed a trail of blood stains splattered across the walls and floors of every room, suggesting a violent struggle throughout the apartment. As the investigators pieced together the evidence, a sinister narrative emerged. Traces of blood trailed from the living room to the bedroom, painting a haunting picture of something being dragged. The bed bore a grim imprint, a haunting shape of a torso, highlighted by the revealing glow of blue star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and splattered across the living room wall only added to the gruesome mosaic of the crime scene. The sheer amount of blood found suggested a scene of extreme violence, making survival unlikely. Outside the apartment, the search continued, uncovering trash bags containing Tishko's bedding, stained with clear signs of blood. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was presented with the incriminating evidence, which he promptly denied any knowledge of, firmly asserting that he would be aware of any substantial bloodshed in his own residence. Meanwhile, the quest to find Wilma intensified, with an ever-growing throng of individuals rallying daily, determined to aid in her search, fueling hope amidst the encroaching darkness of the unfolding tragedy. The apartment where Wilma was last seen turned into a stark crime scene, yet all attempts to establish contact with her remained fruitless. Then, on November 28th, 2 weeks since Wilma vanished without a trace, Cadaver dogs were enlisted for assistance at the crime scene. These trained canines, specialized in detecting scents associated with deceased individuals, ventured into the bedroom and swiftly signaled a chilling indication. A deceased person or human remains had likely been in that very area. Moreover, a distinct odor permeated the apartment, heightening the grim atmosphere. Despite prior searches, the police meticulously re-examined the bedroom, drawn to the area marked by the dogs. Their focus honed in on a wardrobe, seemingly just another piece of furniture in the room. Yet within that innocuous wardrobe lay a small travel case, seemingly inconspicuous among the room's contents. Although previously overlooked, the officers, driven by instinct, seized the case, poised to uncover its secrets. Inside, investigators discovered a large object concealed within aluminum kitchen foil. A harrowing revelation met with bloodstains in the case's interior. As they cautiously unraveled the foil's contents, a heart-wrenching and shocking reality awaited them. Wilma's decapitated head lay shrouded within. The head had been wrapped meticulously and bound with tape, and the travel case had become a repository of the horrifying events that had happened to Wilma. The case was dispatched to Gothenburg's forensic labs for further testing, where detailed examination revealed Tishko's fingerprints, an ominous connection tying him to the heinous act. Additionally, at the crime scene where the thrown-away garbage bags were found, a footstep marked with Wilma's blood showed Tishko's clear footprint. The sad discoveries revealed the savageness of the crime. Medical examiners, although not able to definitively determine the reason for Wilma's death, pointed out serious head and eye wounds caused by a harsh blow. The horrific act of cutting off her head resulted in additional injuries to her head. Wilma's heartbroken family learned the heartbreaking truth about their daughter's destiny. Linda, driven by strong determination, joined the search operations, no longer looking for their missing loved one, but sadly hunting for the rest of Wilma's remains. The family, thrown into the worst of nightmares, faced the shocking details emerging from the proof found in the walls of the apartment. A dreadful truth came to light. Wilma's final moments probably took place in the living room where she was subjected to a violent attack. Her world was shattered by a devastating head strike, leaving behind a haunting trace of violence. The Swedish authorities filed a report that detailed Tishko's denial of Andersson's murder, vehemently asserting his innocence. His unsettling statement echoed, insisting on a warped sense of affection, which he claimed, "You forget that this is a girl that I have loved, and that I have lived my life perfectly. If I had murdered my girl, I would not have saved her head." Law enforcement had secured ample evidence to press charges against Tishko, and his trial was set for May 2020. However, Wilma's body remained undiscovered throughout the entire court proceedings. Shabazz, devoid of any display of remorse or emotion, stood stoic amidst the relentless investigation. Reports surfaced, painting a disturbing picture of his beliefs. Allegations that he viewed his ex-girlfriend as a figure of malevolence, associating her with Satan and espousing outlandish claims of her collaboration with Democrats against the then US President, Donald Trump. His bizarre hero worship of the president even led to a failed attempt to join Trump's campaign, halted due to inadequate entry documents. Attempts to plead not guilty by reason of insanity during the trial, by citing these absurd beliefs and claims of Wilma as proof of insanity by his defense, fell short. On July 27, 2020, the verdict sealed Tishko's fate. The court pronounced 23-year-old Tishko Shabazz Ahmed guilty of 17-year-old Wilma Andersson's murder, handing down a life sentence, which was later reduced to 18 years by the Court of Appeal. The baffling reduction of the sentence stemmed from the absence of concrete evidence pinpointing the exact cause of Wilma's demise, or the sequence of events due to the absence of her body, a haunting absence that left critical questions unanswered, hindering the pursuit of justice. In late 2020, Wilma's funeral brought a solemn closure to this tragic saga, a heart-wrenching conclusion that undoubtedly plunged Wilma's family into unfathomable sorrow. our deepest sympathies go out to the life lost too soon and the grieving loved ones she left behind. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ricky Neve. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day of his tragic death matched with James Watson, who was a teenager at the time and had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite his mother's harsh way of raising her children, she seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her actions, driving her to seek justice for her son's murder. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what truly happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised, and what events occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? Ricky Lee Harvey, also known as Ricky Neve, was born on March 4, 1988, in the city of Peterborough, located in the county of Cambridgeshire, in England, to Trevor Harvey and Ruth Ann Gregg. Ruth's life had been marked by turmoil from an early age, with her being placed in foster care at the mere age of 2. Her younger brother, who was born blind at the tender age of 1, had already been placed in foster care. She endured a challenging journey through various foster homes before returning to her parents' care, forever changed by the abuse and insults she suffered while she was under foster care. Her empathy and affection dwindled with time, which was an observation made and reported by her mother to the authorities, a struggle that the mother had been dealing with too for quite some time. Tragedy struck again when Ruth's parents took their own lives as a suicide pact later on, leaving her to face the world alone once again. At 16, she met Trevor Harvey, settled in Cambridgeshire, and gave birth to their first child, Rebecca Maria Harvey, in 1986. They had their second child, Ricky, 2 years later. Their happiness was short-lived, as Trevor and Ruth separated when Ricky was only 3, but Ruth met Dean Neve not long after. They married and welcomed their first daughter into the world and named her Rochelle Neve. The family later moved into the Welland estate in Peterborough in 1992. Ruth decided to change Ricky's surname to match her new husband's, and he was now known as Ricky Neve. Sometime later, they welcomed another daughter and named her Sheridan Neve. They lived in Red Mile Walk, which was a part of the Welland estate that was well known for its association with crime and drug use. Unfortunately, the family's new home was riddled with challenges, as Dean Neve was a notorious drug dealer, and Ruth had succumbed to addiction. She would even spend a lot on drugs, to a point of neglecting her children's basic needs. Ricky and his sisters often wandered the estate without proper care, food, or clothing, drawing concern from neighbors who bravely reported the situation to social services. Ricky was the one who took care of his siblings when they were starved, as he would nick something from the shops and bring it to feed his siblings. He loved being clean, so he also made sure they were clean by running a bath for them. Dean was rarely at home, and Ruth often blamed Ricky for this, claiming that he was always away since he hated his stepson. This made her start hating Ricky, as she would write to Dean during his prison stints how she had hurt him by punching him and burning him with matches, and how she even wanted to kill him. She hated him more as she claimed that he would always laugh at her. The neighbors, often seeing the children outside, had no idea what really happened in that house. Ruth tormented and degraded the innocent children, frequently burning them with cigarettes and hurling insults at them. At one point, she even wrote "idiot" on their foreheads and forbade them from removing it. She would force them to stand for long periods of time while she smacked them on the head. She sent them to buy her drugs even after starving them. An allegation surfaced that she had been seen dangling Ricky by his ankles over a bridge. On one occasion, she forced Ricky to swallow liquid soap, and as he struggled to breathe, he managed to say, "I love you, Mommy." She would strangle the daughters to unconsciousness and even beat them with a hairbrush to the point of breaking it. They were even locked naked in rooms full of urine. The children tried to get the attention of their neighbors, which was often in vain, as their cries were not heard by them. Ricky was placed on the at-risk register after Ruth warned the child services repeatedly that she would kill him. He was taken into short-term care to give the mother some time. However, his files were mismanaged. Ruth, despite the clear evidence of the burns, cuts, and bruises on the children, would get away with it through her false explanations and excuses of accidents, and even blaming Ricky for being clumsy on his part. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day he died tragically matched that of James Watson, the teenage killer who had managed to evade justice for a long time. Despite her cruelty in raising her children, Ricky's mother seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her unforgiving actions, which drove her to seek her son's killer. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the puzzling mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what really happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised? And what occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? On January of 1995, Ruth was suspected of murdering her own son during that very month. She faced charges of cruelty and neglect under the Children's Act and appeared at Peterborough Magistrates' Court, accused of cruelty towards Ricky and one of her other children. In May of 1995, Ruth was charged with the murder of her son and offenses of cruelty to him and 2 of his sisters. Her trial began the following year, in October 1996, at the Northampton Crown Court. Prosecutors told the jury that Ricky and his siblings were treated with cruelty and neglect, backed by witness statements. The prosecution concluded that Ricky was killed in a sacrifice by his mother, based on her numerous death threats to him. Ruth admitted to charges of neglect and cruelty, but denied any involvement in her son's murder. The case hinged on the testimony of a policeman who stated that he had not found the child's body during his search of the woods, where Ricky was eventually discovered on the night of his disappearance. The prosecution claimed the officer might have missed it in the dark. The jurors acquitted Ruth, convinced that she couldn't have moved Ricky's body since the police were with her at the said time. However, she was sentenced to 7 years in jail for the cruelty towards Ricky and his sisters, charges to which she had already confessed. Ruth was released in 2000, but the killer remained a mystery. In 2008, she met Gary Rogers, who married her. By then, Ricky's murder had become a cold case, and the police had given up. Rogers promised Ruth that he would give her all the support she needed to reopen the case and try to find the killer. In 2013, with the help of Cambridgeshire Times editor John Elworthy, they worked tirelessly to campaign for the reopening of the case, and eventually succeeded. Rogers secured the original files from Ruth's former solicitor, a collection of 13 boxes with 8 to 12 ring binders filled with papers, and diligently read through each one. They met Paul Fullwood, the head of the local major crime unit at the time, who listened to the evidence they had and saw the reviews that the police had done beforehand. He thought the original hypothesis of Ruth being the killer was fanciful at best, and the more he looked at it, the more he became convinced that they needed to investigate further. Mr. Fullwood organized a cold case investigation with a new team made up of staff not involved in the original investigation. With fresh perspective, determination, and what they deemed as a stroke of luck, new evidence that would help solve the crime was found in the forensic archives. The crucial evidence was a piece of sellotape used to collect fibers from Ricky's clothes. Advancements in DNA technology in recent years have played a crucial role in solving cold cases, bringing justice for victims whose killers were thought to have gotten away, and providing closure to family and friends. An unidentified DNA was found on Ricky's clothes, and forensic tests matched it to none other than James Watson. At the time of Ricky's death, Watson was only 13 and lived at Woodgate's Children's Home in Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away from Peterborough. He had moved there from foster care in March of 1994. On November 25, 1994, 3 days before Ricky's murder, Watson had asked his mother about a young child found dead in the woods. His mother, having no clue what he was talking about, brushed off the conversation, assuring him that nobody had heard of such a thing happening. Little did she know that he would be the one behind such an atrocity just 3 days later. Watson was questioned by the police after several witnesses claimed to have seen them together on that fateful day, but he vehemently denied it, stating he was nowhere near Ricky and that he only caught a glimpse of him. The mother also said nothing about the conversation they had just some days prior about the made-up scenario of the young child in the woods that would materialize in less than a week with an almost similar description to what had actually happened. The police did not further challenge him, perhaps due to ignorance or their preference for the idea of Ruth being the killer and not some disturbed teenager. They probably didn't know he was disturbed until later. Watson was, of course, searched for and arrested in April 2016 in connection with Ricky's murder. By then, he was already a serial offender with a criminal record that included stealing cars and an arson attack at a British transport police station back in 2008. Questioned by the new investigation team about his DNA ending up on Ricky's clothes, Watson changed the story he had initially given to the police. He now said that he might have lifted Ricky to help him see over a fence. This statement started getting him into further trouble. The police tested his claim and found footage from 1994, showing the estate being redeveloped. They discovered that the fence was not built when Ricky Neve was still there, as it was constructed after he was already murdered. The investigators were therefore able to prove that Watson was not only a fantasist, but also a huge liar. However, this was still not enough to secure his conviction, so they started to pull other pieces of evidence together. It was not long until evidence was found that he had inappropriately touched a 5-year-old child when he was around 11 or 12, and his ex-girlfriend had also complained about him strangling her during sex. 2 teachers also revealed how he had become obsessed with Ricky's murder case, showing an unnatural level of interest in it, and even photocopying the front page of the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, which covered the case. More disturbing behavior had also been noted at the children's home where he lived, including him pleasing himself over pictures of young boys in underwear. He also kept a dead pheasant in his room, and it was claimed that he had on one occasion killed a bird and spread its wings in a sinister reconstruction of Ricky's murder. After being released on police bail, he left the UK 3 months later in a motorhome with another bail hostel resident. He travelled to Rotterdam, then France, and crossed the Pyrenees into Portugal. From France, he had reached out to his sister, Claire Perner, admitting that he was in serious trouble and that he had made a massive mistake. The next time he called, he reiterated that he was in deeper trouble and urgently needed to return to the UK. He had shamelessly posted pictures of himself on social media, enjoying the beaches, bragging about how he got out of the country. Seeing the pictures of Watson abroad, which were extensively covered in the media, angered Ricky's family. They knew that since he had escaped the country, even after his passport had been taken, he was definitely guilty of the act. Watson was eventually rearrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon and extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of murder by a majority of the Old Bailey jury. Previously, the court heard how Watson's sexual interest in younger boys was known to police, who had interviewed him over an allegation that he molested a 5-year-old back in 1993. The disturbing behavior was noted at Watson's children's home, and the prosecution claimed it was no coincidence that 3 days before the murder, Watson was the source of a bogus radio report about a 2-year-old boy being strangled. Immediately after Ricky's murder, in identical circumstances, Watson obsessed over newspaper coverage of the killing, copying front-page stories at school. the jurors heard that key evidence in the case against Watson included Ricky's last meal of Weetabix, taken in the morning, which fixed his time of death at around noon when he was seen playing with Watson. It meant that Ricky was killed shortly after heading to the woods with Watson, where he used to play. Watson's legal team had accused Ricky's mother, but she denied any involvement. Ricky's muddy Clark shoes also indicated his walk into the woods was a one-way trip, and not a case of being murdered by the mother and the body being dragged into the forest, therefore ruling out that accusation. After a trial at London's Old Bailey that took place from January 18th to April 21st, 2022, James Watson, at the age of 41, was found guilty of Ricky Neve's murder. On June 24, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years by Mrs. Justice McGowan. The judge considered Watson's age at the time of Ricky's death as a significant factor in determining the sentence. In June 2023, Watson was granted permission to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued before the Court of Appeal that Watson was not able to get a fair trial because too much of the evidence from which the killer's DNA could have been recovered was lost or destroyed in the intervening years. This case could have been solved much earlier if the official police records of 6 reported sexual assaults on children in the Welland estate in the 3-year period before Ricky's murder had been thoroughly investigated. If the reports had been followed up, the allegation on his record of touching a 5-year-old could have been a crucial lead to the police in finding the perpetrator. These failures in the investigation add to the list of the many shortcomings in this case. The verdict was a triumph for Ricky's sisters, who had never thought they would see justice for their beloved brother. With the killer finally caught, the family found a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives while cherishing the memory of the little boy Ricky was back in 1994. Ricky Neve will forever be remembered as a loving and caring brother and a brave and kind-hearted boy. Despite facing challenges at a young age, he showed remarkable courage and love and always protected his sisters. He deserved a life brimming with joy, but tragically, he endured cruelty, neglect, and the ultimate horror of murder. If he had been given the love and affection he deserved, this heart-wrenching tragedy might never have occurred in the first place.
Heather, just 22 years old, had recently embarked on her college journey, settling into her job, and it felt like life was full of promise. Maples' smile and laughter were contagious, and her constant chatter filled the air. She radiated warmth and energy, uplifting everyone around her. Everything changed on January 7th, 2015, when Heather Maples didn't show up for work. Her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, partly unclothed. Who had the right to take Heather Maples' life? Detectives faced a challenging investigation because Heather had no enemies, and the motive behind this crime remained unclear. If not for one small detail, Heather Maples' death could have remained unsolved, and the criminal would have gone unpunished.
Yes, det är ett word of our say here, and your what? The only way you're bloody figure for good there is you're an airy put. Ain't in your hand or your waiver.
On a typical morning at the real estate agency in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7th, 2015, Kelsey Price arrived at work and began her usual tasks. Heather, her friend and colleague, was running late, which wasn't surprising to Kelsey, as Heather was known for her lack of punctuality. Kelsey started calling Heather to wake her up, but received no answer. The previous night, Heather had planned to go to a bar with some friends and had asked Kelsey to come get her if she overslept or didn't answer her calls. Therefore, Kelsey wasn't concerned and went to Heather's apartment to wake her up. The girls' apartments were located in the same complex where they worked. Upon arriving, Kelsey found the front door unlocked. Easily entering inside, she saw her friend lying on the bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. Assuming Heather had a wild night, Kelsey tried to wake her up, but there was no response. She then tapped Heather's foot, attempting to rouse her from her sleep, which no one would ever interrupt again. Maple's foot was so cold that Kelsey literally jumped back in horror at the realization of what had happened. Kelsey Price, in horror, stepped out of the apartment and called 911. Soon, emergency services were on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, and the forensic team meticulously combed through the apartment. Heather was indeed partially undressed, with signs of blows on her face. The hair of the poor girl was soaked in blood, which was also splattered on the walls. It was clear she had been brutally beaten, tortured, and actually assaulted. Massey and his colleague Detective Maples, coincidentally sharing Heather's surname, recalled this crime as a horrifying nightmare. That's understandable, as witnessing such a heart-wrenching scene is extremely difficult. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother jokingly called Heather a hurricane baby. This nickname was entirely justified, as many envied the energy and courage that Heather possessed. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather welcomed a brother, Ryan, into her life with great joy. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with significant developmental delays, and the older sister, of her own accord, dedicated all her free time to him. She took care of him, happily spent time with him, taught him to speak, walk, and eat on his own. Heather was in the 7th grade at the time and devoted all the following years until graduation to Ryan, showing immense love and dedication to her brother. At the age of 22, Heather Maples made the bold decision to leave her Texas home and embark on a new chapter in Tennessee, pursuing her dream of becoming a psychologist. The journey began with a call from her former classmate, Chaz, inviting her to join him in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he studied. According to him, it was the perfect place for Heather, with a small college town where she could get a great opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted, and in January 2015, the future student went to Chaz in Murfreesboro. By the way, their relationship soon turned romantic. A completely different life began for the girl. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found a job in the office of the residential complex where they lived. Maples was balancing work with her college preparations. Her friends and family supported her. Everything seemed to be going well, but soon her relationship with Chaz began to crumble, which led to a breakup, and Chaz moved away. At the beginning of August, she excitedly called her mother to share this wonderful news. She had been accepted to college. Her mother, filled with pride, was thrilled for Heather's achievement. However, a week later, Heather failed to show up for work, sparking concern and uncertainty. The detectives understood that, considering the nature of the crime, it could have been related to Heather's personal life. At that point, most of her friends were considered suspects, and frankly speaking, there were reasons for that. Upon examining the apartment, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Heather likely knew her attacker and possibly let them in herself. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, several important pieces of evidence were discovered: unknown DNA and a hair that did not belong to the victim. All of this was sent for analysis to identify the suspect. However, the most significant piece of evidence was a clear, bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed. Detective Massey explained that if someone had deliberately dipped their finger in ink and intentionally left their mark, it wouldn't have been so clear and precise. Of course, this print was sent for analysis as well. Additionally, Heather's mobile phone was found in the apartment, but without the password, accessing its contents was impossible. This is where Kelsey came in handy. She played a crucial role, not only helping with the phone, but also deciding to inform Heather's mother of her death, believing it would be better coming from someone who loved and cared for Heather. Detective Massey hoped to get a lot of information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. He wanted to know everything about the victim's personal life, especially her relationship with Chaz. Kelsey told the detective that the relationship was quite tense, as Chaz had obvious anger management issues, and sometimes he was too aggressive and cruel towards Heather, so the girl decided to end the relationship herself. Therefore, the police immediately decided to investigate Chaz, but an unexpected turn of events occurred. A young man named Michael was determined to access the crime scene despite the caution tape. He had keys to Heather's apartment.
How do you know Heather? This is really rude, but I gotta ask you because sometimes if he kills, it's so out here, huh? The person I learned that he had sexual romantic knowledge together, and then he tried to take him more. Thank you.
According to Michael, on the evening before her death, Heather called him and invited him for dinner, which he accepted. Immediately after dinner, Michael went home, unlike Heather, who went to a local bar with friends. But later, Heather reached out to Michael for help.
She called me at 11:40, and so the force has to sell them. Because it tells me that I didn't come to the war. She really means there right now. There's people that ain't on there, and she's really upset. So I said, "Can
As Michael recounted, Heather was in trouble. A young man named Ortavio was bothering her and was quite aggressive. Immediately after the incident, Michael offered to drive Heather home.
She orders. Is there grainy acts, threats? Sausage. Hurry. And we severed. She was done. I drove her to her at dreams. You sure? Stairs. I not took she was at.
As per his statement, it was around 2:30 in the morning on August 7th, the last time he saw Heather. Additionally, during the interrogation, Michael mentioned that Heather's front door should have been unlocked because he had her keys since she was dressed in a dress and didn't have pockets to carry them, and he simply forgot to return them after unlocking the door. Michael was very disappointed and did not seem like a liar at all, but investigators had to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. They also contacted the bar to obtain surveillance footage, which confirmed everything Michael had said during the interrogation. Analysis confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene did not match his. After Michael was cleared as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ortavio. With Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's mobile phone, interest in Ortavio significantly increased. Detectives discovered that Heather had messaged Ortavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead.
What are we doing? I don't know. A whole lot about here is sensitive, knife styles, honey, hearing up you wasn't so you or what is it in you? I think she finished it when it gets lands and like.
But why did Heather call Ortavio to her home after Michael had saved her from him? The answer was simple. They were friends, and became more persistent than usual at the bar. Heather was caught off guard. She wasn't prepared for this. Now the detectives needed to speak with Ortavio to get his side of the story.
What did you do to get her there for that? Oh, no, we're chasing Kilo. We went into Swamp. Okay, and it was Heather, a friend of mine. I'll show you a picture, okay? Yeah, many out there on that would have been taken, but I was a little good this one was. It hadn't just. Yeah, and I was there, see it anyway. It was so sad.
The detectives immediately realized that Ortavio was unaware of Heather's death, but what if he was somehow involved in this case? Meanwhile, the interrogation continued.
Heather says you can't fight over Chicago, and we met about to meet you. Yeah, and so that was it.
Afterward, Massey eventually asked about the late-night message from Heather.
She takes another text to yell at you 30 or something. He has it attempt. Oh, well, all Larry's. He was on this morning.
The detectives intensified their questioning of Ortavio, using a tough interrogation method that not every suspect could withstand.
He will saw you while you are in all records since you are him. You were wavered yesterday. Your kids was wizard all day. Is yours not your take his full take? Outlays you takes you the bat over there. You went over there, and then something happened. And not only was this girl raped, she's dead. What? No way. His way, one day, here's what we were doing. There's DNA all over later. Let's get it to go back, I'll believe for one yesterday. Oh, no, that's...
Ortavio was shocked by what he heard. It seemed he genuinely didn't know what had happened to Heather. Following the interrogation, he willingly agreed to a DNA test, confident that it would clear his name. The results proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Without any leads, the detectives worked practically around the clock, reviewing surveillance footage, scrutinizing every detail provided by witnesses. On the 9th day of the investigation, as Detective Massey was preparing to leave the office late at night, he received a crucial call from one of the directors of the forensic laboratory. Massey finally got the answer regarding the bloody fingerprint that was lifted from Heather's bed. It belonged to a young man named Brandon Bowling, whose fingerprints were on file due to his employment at a company where he previously worked.
Oh, you know him. You know, Chase. You don't remember what?
This development prompted Detective Massey to approach the interrogation very gently, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what happened that night.
Serlina or Hobbit? Harmony heard? Is out here though, that sure to let you know, it wasn't there on the altar. You never sadishly keep mutted law, sir. Though he asked his head ribbered, it was eventually into a lot more hurt. And he was alive. Stop, sir. Suntalin, you were delivered. Here we do. That's the last time you were at my farth. Tell me, is you lying?
The detectives knew he was lying because the fingerprint was fresh.
You know you were there. No, I haven't. So Ned, you need to tell him. So that I can understand I go, no, I'll fair. I don't know there, isn't it? Okay, and then had it through Messi of a prelong. Yeah, the bed. I'm such the deal. So it's stays up in the house. I'll house first.
It seemed that Brandon understood he was caught, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death.
That he may hear him as this support, made him put you to death. Do you understand? And his here, this is the support conversation in your loss. The only way your bloody fair thing out there is you're an airplane. Ain't that your handler, your waiver. So, I don't know what out of me.
After questioning, detectives requested a DNA test from Brandon, suggesting that if he was innocent, the test would prove it. Brandon did as he was asked, perhaps hoping to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. The investigators decided not to wait for the test results. The match of the fingerprint provided substantial grounds for the next step. The police immediately sent a request to the court for permission to access Brandon's phone, which could help the investigation confirm his movements, track calls, and texts on the night of the crime. However, they were unprepared for what they found on his phone after the court approval. The video from Brandon Bowling's phone was one of the most shocking, even to the most experienced detectives. In this video, the room of the core Heather was captured. Brandon recorded everything, from intimate acts to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. In February 2018, Brandon Richmond Bowling pleaded guilty to the attack on Heather Maples. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a speech that surprised many.
I am right along with my daughter. That ain't where I learned. Don't worry about anything, worry about everything.
When the trial ended, in the corridor, Jennifer approached Bowling's mother. Jennifer simply hugged this woman, saying that they both lost their children that day. Unfortunately, Brandon Bowling never explained his motives. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think Brandon's motive was, if there was one?